Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
At the moment, I'd like to do a post-mortem on Theresa May's speech, but I don't know whether or not I'm going to upset you first when I tell you that two things. Number one, I feel really sorry for her. Number one, I felt really sorry for her during the duration of yesterday's speech. I thought it was awful what she had to endure. Number two, I think I quite like her. And I know that that's going to come as something of a shock to many people who prefer their politics to be tribal and binary. And I know, as Gary has already pointed out, that she is susceptible to accusations of callousness. Gary puts it very well, Gary Barker. I try to care about everybody, so when someone who stomps all over the vulnerable has a tricky day, why should I show sympathy? I think that's precisely when you need to show sympathy. I'm not endorsing the notion that she necessarily stomps all over the vulnerable, but I respect your right to argue that point. But there's no point, seeing yourself, mate, as someone who tries to care about everybody when you're in the next line of the same sentence making excuses for not caring about her. The problem I've got, the phone lines are open on this, I haven't got a great deal to say on the subject, so the sooner you pile in the quicker. 0345 606 0973. Note to self, every time you say you haven't got a great deal to say on a subject, you generally go on a 20-minute monologue, you prune. But you know what I mean. It's partly that thing I blame my mum for, which is what you might call a sort of benign chauvinism that I suffer from. I know that I look at Theresa May and feel more protective and more charitable than I would if she was a man. It's kind of like the opposite of what the Daily Mail has done today, when they think that it's supportive to say the old girl made it to the end. It's kind of like to think that I have the side of the coin, the positive, nice side of the coin, when it comes to a degree of benign chauvinism, whereas men that write stuff like that look back fondly on the days when their wives would have been keeping their slippers warm in the Arga all day, waiting to pop them onto their stockinged feet when they got home from a tough day at the office. So I know that I reacted to Theresa May partly because she is a woman, and I'm not ready yet in this millennial age. I'm not ready to stop being that person. I'm really sorry. I'm just not. It's like holding doors open. You can call it chivalry or you can call it chauvinism. I'm being honest with you. I know who I am. I know what I am. And I am a man who looks at a woman suffering in public and feels a lot more sympathy than he would if it was a man. I also then draw parallels between two politicians, regardless of gender, and wonder how you think the newspapers today, it's only really the Mail and the Express that can keep a straight face while claiming that she had anything other than a complete nightmare yesterday. But imagine if Ed Miliband had undergone that experience yesterday. Imagine if Ed Miliband had been literally unable to get words out of his mouth while letters fell off the slogan in the background. It's a man whose political career arguably ended when he struggled to eat a bacon sandwich in a greasy spoon cafe. Such was the power and the vitriol of the press, and so stupid are we now in swallowing this nonsense. Theresa May's fitness to be Prime Minister has absolutely nothing to do with the state of her larynx yesterday. You can have the most positive or negative view of her fitness to be Prime Minister, but the notion that her larynx yesterday is a key indicator of her fitness for office is palpably absurd. Not a little offensive, actually, to anyone who isn't furiously hard of thinking. And the same is true of Ed Miliband's ability to eat a bacon sandwich. But of course, for one of them, it was toast. Actually, I don't know if it was toast. I think it was a bap. And for the other one, it was treated by the same newspapers that would have crucified Miliband, treated as the old girl getting through it. The old girl made it to the end. So what did you think of the speech? I'd love to know. 0345 606 0973. I don't understand politics at the moment. I've got a horrible feeling that this combination of Brexit and the kind of mainstreaming of what had previously been considered off limits in public discourse, what some people call political correctness, but the rest of us call decency and manners, meant that you couldn't say certain things, you couldn't pursue certain lines in public. A foreign secretary probably couldn't have made jokes about dead Africans a couple of years ago without being fired. It's all very well doing it when you're writing columns for the Daily Telegraph and you're describing members of the Commonwealth as smiling pickaninnies, but when you're an actual foreign secretary, it's your job to go to these Commonwealth countries whose residents you've described as smiling pickaninnies and try and get a good deal to plug some of the gaps left by Brexit. That's just nuts now, how mad things have become. And when people ask me how has it changed so much, the only answer I've got is that people who've spent their entire lives feeling ashamed of their bigotries and prejudices have been given by Donald Trump and Brexit this opportunity not to feel ashamed anymore. And that is such a powerful gift. It overrides everything else. Donald Trump can go to Puerto Rico and insult everybody. You know, Boris Johnson can stand up in public and make an utter mockery of his office. But because these people are perceived by those who've had to keep a lid upon their own vile views for their entire lives, you know, even family members would have told them they were disgusting a few years ago. Now they're more likely to get an invitation onto Question Time. And because they're so grateful for that, both in America and in Britain, thank you, Donald. I no longer feel ashamed of what beats beneath my breast. I thank you, Brexit. Thank you, Nige. I no longer feel ashamed of my vile innermost prejudices about other people. That's all that there is. That's all I can come up with. And Theresa May's not part of that. Theresa May is not part of that process, which is why she is struggling so much. I think she understands it. She knows she's got to keep these chomping rednecks happy on her own back benches, the people who would, you know, routinely not even have got a phone call off the Daily Express for a comment on a story, but now they're front and centre every day. She's trying to keep them happy while also being, and shoot me if you don't like this, a decent woman. And then I've got that little voice in the back of my head saying you're just being blind to reality because she's a woman. That doesn't make you a good guy. That doesn't make you a chivalrous knight of the realm. It makes you a muppet, mate, because you're judging her according to rules that are different from those you'd apply to anybody else. So I just got a whole heap of confusion and sympathy from yesterday. I think politically now she's a bit of a joke. I don't know how you can move from claiming that a citizen of the world is a citizen of nowhere to then quoting Joe Cox in the context of liberalism and community spirit. But again, that's a highlight of what she's had to do. When she made those original speeches, she was essentially throwing her all in on the same mindset that put those vans out telling people they'd be deported. And now I think the real Theresa May is much nicer than that. And she pretended to have a racist streak and she pretended to be nasty in order to keep that Brexit wing of the party happy. But she can't keep them happy. Nothing can keep them happy because you can't reason somebody out of a position that they haven't been reasoned into. So what yesterday's speech highlighted was that Theresa May doesn't know what to do. She hasn't got a clue. She'll take the advice from the last voice she heard. She became temporarily enthusiastic about leaving the European Union when Nick Timothy was whispering into her ear. She clearly now is of the view that it's an absolute impossibility to come out with anything better than what we've currently got, but she knows that if she says that too publicly, then the turmoil that would be inflicted upon the Conservative Party would see them hounded out of office and replaced by Jeremy Corbyn. And I'll go further and say I think her fear of what Jeremy Corbyn represents is a form of patriotism. And the reason why Theresa May won't do what she wants to do and walk away is because she's terrified of a Corbyn government. Behind the bout of coughing, Theresa May yesterday announced Ed Miliband's policy on energy bill price caps and a sort of combination of Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Miliband's policy, although slightly watered down versions on housing and the use it or lose it message to developers. The organ donation argument that you have to opt out if you don't want organs to be donated after death, I think has already happened in Wales. So you're left with the question of as we've done on this programme quite often, what does she stand for? But today, I want to know what you thought about the speech. Incorrigible FCA, one of my most fondly regarded contributors to the programme. You're rarely wrong, James, but when you are, you're spectacularly wrong. I'm just saying two things. Number one, I feel sorry for Theresa May. Number two, I felt incredibly sorry for her yesterday. Number three, I think the reason she remains in power is because under her brand of patriotism, okay, she thinks Jeremy Corbyn genuinely would be a disaster for the country. If it wasn't for that fact and the high likelihood that if she fell on her sword now, a general election would inevitably ensue, she'd be gone. You could tell she doesn't want to be there. Her husband doesn't want her there. And again, I thought when he pounded up onto the stage at the end and gave her a hug, that was lovely to see. I like seeing love in action. We live in a country where we're fetishizing hate. People who peddle hate every day are getting all the prizes at the moment, all the rewards. I'd like to see love. Not a word I ordinarily associate with Theresa May, but the relationship between her and her husband was a thing of beauty. If you don't like this, you're as bad as they are. Supposed to, left-wing people, supposed to be the compassionate ones, like to pat themselves on the back for being the ones that give people an even break. So give her a break. How can you not feel sorry for what happened yesterday? Politically, it's an absolute disaster. We're in a complete mess. Nobody knows what's going on. We're all in the dark. Nobody knows where the light switch is. The amount of effort that these newspapers are putting into pretending that they knew this was going to happen. How long is it since they were telling us that Theresa May was the Iron Lady? Less than a year, I think. The same people. But when you've got a megalomaniac in charge of huge swathes of the British media, the truth is the first casualty. So you have to trust your own truth. And you are either a person who watches a woman of a certain age suffering in public in a horrible, horrible fashion and feels for her, or you're the kind of person that doesn't. Before we pile in on the latest, the current Conservative Prime Minister, some news involving a previous one. Allegations that former Prime Minister Sir Edward Heath raped and indecently assaulted boys were sufficiently credible to justify questioning him under caution were he alive today. This is the result of a controversial Wiltshire police inquiry, which we'll talk to Charlotte Gay about shortly. But I have to tell you, and this is a profoundly interesting element of the inquiry. Allegations against Sir Edward Heath came from 14 different force areas: Wiltshire, the Met here in London, Hampshire, Jersey, Guernsey, Kent, Norfolk, West Mercia, West Yorkshire, Gloucestershire, Greater Manchester, Surrey, Sussex and Northern Ireland. They spent £1.5 million on the investigation, which will prompt some outcry in the usual quarters. But 14 different forces making allegations against a senior public figure, or 14 separate forces investigating allegations against a senior public figure. I just put it to you again, if it wasn't a very posh white bloke, what would the public reaction be? Well, one of these credible allegations, and credible doesn't mean true, it just means worthy of investigation. That's the opposite of incredible. Believable, if you will, as opposed to unbelievable, involves an 11-year-old boy. I know for a fact that if I picked someone of a different class, a different ethnicity, possibly even a different political perspective, and told you that there were 14 different forces investigating allegations of child sex abuse, the reaction from columnists in right-wing newspapers, I'm thinking of chiefly, and their herds of followers, be utterly unrecognisable. And I don't get it, because I've said it to you a billion times. I do not feel more disgusted by the possibility that a little boy's been raped by a Conservative politician than I do by the possibility that a little girl's been raped by a Pakistani taxi driver up in Rotherham. The crime the allegation is identical. How can you base your reaction to a crime upon the ethnicity of the alleged culprit? Well, there's a very short answer to that question, and it begins with R. 8 minutes after 11, back to Theresa May. Jane is in Biggin Hill. Jane, your thoughts on yesterday's speech?
Hi, James. Yeah, I mean, I just feel, I know you're a decent fella, and I really respect a lot of what you say, and...
There's a massive butt on the horizon, Jane, and it's not mine.
There is a massive, massive butt. No, I don't feel sorry for Theresa May, and I am actually somebody who likes to feel that I'm compassionate, I'm caring, I think about people, I try and do the right thing, but I do not feel sorry for that woman.
Why not?
I do not. She doesn't feel sorry for me or anyone like me or my children or my family and the dreadful, dreadful policies that her and her party are pushing through and doing nothing. And if she wanted to save her bacon yesterday, excuse the pun, since you brought up Edward.
Oh, yeah, well done. I had to work that one out there, Jane.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Go on.
If she'd have gone and said, you know what, on my watch, I'm going to build 350,000 houses, not 25,000.
5,000 a year over 5 years.
It's not even going to touch the side, James. Do these people have any idea what's going on out here in the real world? Well, let me tell you my story, yeah? So I'm a single working mum. I've worked my whole life. I've raised 3 children into what I consider to be 3 decent adults, yeah? I've tried. I've paid a mortgage since I was 30 years of age. I've done this all on my own, pretty much, single-handed. And I managed to provide my children with some sort of decent life, yeah?
Yeah.
Now my children are young adults. Yeah, they want to have children of their own and they can't. They're struggling. They don't know what to do. They've tried the private renting thing. They can't save anything. to get anywhere close to what they need to be able to get a mortgage. That's about the disgusting behaviour of greedy landlords, yeah? I mean, my eldest daughter, literally, he came out and she'd been in the property for 3 years. We'd improved the property for him, and then he decided that he wanted to sell because he had a rich person who wanted to buy and wanted to be in 2 weeks.
It's a brilliant illustration of the problem, because housing crisis is the word, not housing shortage. The house that your family could live in is there, but the market is so skewed that it's practically unaffordable for anybody. And you're right, the only answer is to go back to Harold Macmillan, Harold Wilson, and build 250,000 houses.
Build the houses, build them.
OK, but housing aside, Jane, can I inquire after your age, or would that be ungallant of me?
No, I'm 56. I was 56 last month.
OK, so you're similar generation to Theresa May. I'm getting some right old jip on this one. I'll read you this one here. This is awful from Emma, who again is one of my favourite contributors normally. She says, you can't resist the image of mimsy Middle England religious education teachers. It'd be like you not holding the door open for a nun. I sometimes think I share too much on the programme, Jane. But you are of a similar generation to Theresa May. And when I see somebody, particularly a woman who's older than me, suffering in public, my first reaction is sympathy. Does that make me a mug?
No, of course not. Of course not. I mean, I've got fellas in my family that would be exactly the same as you. They do hold the door open for a woman. They don't mean nothing by it, but they'll do it. They'd feel it was a knock to their masculinity if they allowed a woman to kind of stand up while they sat down. Do you know what I mean? I know these people. They're decent men. Do you know what I mean? They're not, they don't mean any slight by it. But you can't feel sorry for that woman. There's people out there now.
Do you not think she's decent under the... I mean...
I'm sorry, darling, I don't. I'd love to say that she was. I'd love to be able to say underneath all of that, she's a decent lady, but I'm sorry, the things that have happened and been going on under her government and particularly her leadership, I mean, seriously, Jeremy Hunt, and you're just allowing this to happen. We're going to start having Uber nurses. No, I'm sorry.
All right, OK, no, I mean, it's not an exercise in sort of examining my personal psychodrama, this. It is an exercise in examining the public discourse. A Prime Minister makes a speech, it goes appallingly wrong. More wrong, really, than any scriptwriter would dare have invented. So the letter fell off. That for me, was the point at which he thought, oh, my Lord. The poor woman, but it appears I was in something of a minority. And I think she's a disastrous Prime Minister, but only as a victim of circumstance. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting she's good. I liked it when she quoted Joe Cox, but as soon as I found myself responding warmly to that simple description of humanity and the commonality and shared interests, shared traits, shared characteristics, I had the echo in my head of the speeches she made to keep the Brexiters happy, which are the opposite of all those things. The sort of nativistic, faux imperialistic belief that because we're English or British somehow we're fundamentally different from somebody born and 5 miles away over the water. It's incredible, but it's where we are. 11-13, 1-0 against me. Paul is in Sheffield. Paul, did you feel sympathy for her?
Morning, James.
Hello, Paul.
Can I just start with saying I want you to do a lottery because you preempted this after her disastrous defence. Was it on the Andrew Marr show of Boris Johnson?
Yes.
Now, I think that was just before he mentioned about, clearing all the bodies away from Libya. Now, the only problem is, James, I said to you, you're going to lay down with dogs, you're going to get up with fleas, and it's as simple as...
But she can't sack him. I mean, I'm going to find myself in a very odd place, aren't I, for the rest of this premiership, because she is utterly a victim of circumstance. And the thing that's keeping her in the job, and the thing that means she has to lie down with dogs, is her genuine belief, which is kind of the point of being a Conservative, that Jeremy Corbyn's brand of politics would be disastrous for the country. You don't have to agree or disagree with that. That's who she is. And she can't sack Boris Johnson, because then he'd make an even bigger mess of the Brexit process by standing in the sidelines and doing a farage, pretending that things that are impossible are possible in order to boost his own ego and public image.
I take your point, James, but...
It's not a point, it's a fact.
Okay, so fair enough. Fair enough. But what I will say to you, James, is what's all this strong and stable government, right?
No, we've moved on from that. We're dreaming now. Strong and stable was last year. Now it's the British dream. Is it possible to conceive of anything that's more contrary to the notion of strength and stability than a great big dream?
Well, right. James, can I ask you then, what does Boris Johnson have to do to get sacked? Because he's obviously wanting the sack, and I totally agree.
He's unsackable. He's on Fifth Avenue shooting people. He's gone full Trump. He knows. You remember when Trump said during the election campaign, and this is the illustration, and it pains me, it breaks my heart to say that they're both right. They consider their core vote to be so stupid and so riddled. It's not a class issue. It's intelligence and bigotry. If you tell a bigot that their bigotry is fine, he'll let you get away with anything. And that is what Boris Johnson and Donald Trump are doubling down on now. So he is standing on Fifth Avenue shooting people now, Boris Johnson, and you know what Trump said about that? They'd still vote for me. He's unsackable.
Yeah. And can I just ask you one more, James?
Anything.
Your time up. How many Tories do you think in the conference hall yesterday would have a wry smile on their face? I think a lot of them enjoyed the actual fact that Theresa May, I'm not a lover of the Tories, I'll be honest with you, was having such a terrible time. For goodness me, she had a tickly cock.
They loved it. You could tell some people loved it.
Yeah.
They were relishing it. And then when you ask them what the alternative is, they kind of go a little bit silent. And I'm not here to defend those sort of people. I'm just here to say I think she means well. And I've watched her very closely. And I'm familiar with all of her mistakes. But the speech yesterday, I thought, was the real Theresa May. And there was a vulnerability there that she should have shown before, regardless of her gender. And there was a misplaced or misdirected compassion that I think is real, and maybe it is just me being a symptom of my class and background. Speaking of my class and background, Paul, Mum was in Sheffield this weekend and she had a fantastic time, so may I thank the city through you for looking after my mum this weekend.
And I should imagine Mum will be very happy on with Sunday's result beating Leeds 3-0. So good all round.
Good all round, except
all the best.
My late dad was from Leeds, so we're usually a little bit torn on those match days. Paul, thank you. It's 11:17. I was sort of wrestling with some fairly big questions today with regard to politics. And my feelings yesterday that not only did Theresa May deserve sympathy from all decent people, but also that I thought she portrayed the real her. After she became I don't know why I've ended up defending her, but it's just how I feel. After she became Prime Minister, she had an incredibly difficult job to do to keep the disparate parts of the party together and the Brexit bus, if you will, or the Brexit boat afloat. You couldn't have done that. You couldn't have done it because you wouldn't be able to keep both sides. She tried to keep both sides happy. She tried to have her cake and eat it. It's failed horribly. It's dismal to watch, but it's not a mark of callousness. So yeah, until 12 o'clock, I'm sticking up for Theresa May. Tell me why I shouldn't. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. And there's one tweet that stopped me in my tracks. I never lie to you. And it was when you suggested to me that she's from the same class as the councillors in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea who presided over the prelude to the Grenfell Tower tragedy. That was a huge political moment for many of us in this country, because however you swing politically, the idea that we could have people in power... God, I'm going to sound so naive now, especially in the context of this Ted Heath story that is unfolding as we speak. I'm going to sound so naive. I just didn't believe that there were people who looked at their fellow citizens, who looked at possibly poorer neighbours, and just felt a sort of ambivalence at best and an utter callous disregard at worst. I didn't believe there would be people in public life in Britain who would look at something that was cheap and flammable and decide that that was worth buying, rather than something that was neither cheap nor flammable. To wrap around a building in which 120 families lived. I just didn't believe it was possible. We'll await the findings of the inquiry to see how fair a reflection that is. But the fact that so many people believed it was possible and probable really stopped me in my tracks. And then just when I began to think maybe I'm right, maybe the callousness that's being described here, the institutional callousness, doesn't exist, you saw the reaction of some members of the public to the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and you realise that callousness now has been let loose in this country. The genie is out of the bottle. And when it turned out a lot of the people who lived there might have been brown or been born somewhere else, that genie doubled in size. Why? You know why. Same reason why Boris Johnson can't be sacked. These people have power, even though they are evil. I think is the word I would use. I guess what I'm telling you today is that I don't think Theresa May is evil. 0345 6060 973. Why do we have to portray her as if she is? She had an absolute nightmare yesterday. You can tell it was a nightmare because the only people pretending it wasn't a nightmare are the editors of the Express and the Mail. What's going on? When did we become a country that can't see a woman in her 60s suffering hugely in public and feel anything but sympathy? Maybe we've always been that country. 24 after 11. I must get some calls on. And then I'm going to drop Mystery Hour today. We'll do it tomorrow because Make Some Noise, LBC's big charity day, is on tomorrow. It's a lot more fun. I don't want to do it 2 days running. And there's quite a lot of news to get through. We'll turn our attention to this Ted Heath inquiry after 12 o'clock today. Don't complain. It's only once a year, all right? Wind your neck in. David's in Bethnal Green. Back to the Prime Minister, David. What would you like to say?
Hello, James. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm a big fan of the show.
You're very kind. Thank you.
It's in relation to Theresa May. I think I was similar to you. I had that little bit of a wobble in the last day and a half where I saw her interview with Nick Ferrari, one of your colleagues in LBC,
yes,
when she did that funny voice with Dave Davis, and I was like, well, there's a human side to her. And then when she had the press conference yesterday and she was coughing and spluttering, and then you had the comedian who handed her the faux P45 from Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
I was sort of like, in the moment it was quite funny, but then I thought it was a chilling thought when you spoke about Joe Cox, and anything could have happened in that moment. So there was that sympathy there as well. But then I read an article today about what the Home Office is doing in relation to EU immigrants, and then that just shot it right back down to go, no, I have zero sympathy.
This is you're strong, you're powerful, and you're making me feel weak, which is a compliment to the strength of your arguments. But how confident? And I know she was Home Secretary for 6 years, which means I know that the ice beneath my feet is probably quite thin. But Home Office incompetence is a civil service issue. I believe that when they say to her, people are being sent letters threatening deportation, I believe that that would actually trouble her.
It should, but you have to go back to the point that she was a Home Secretary when the sign of, immigrants leave the country.
Illegal. It said if you are illegally here, leave the country. I found it disgusting. I thought it had echoes of 1930s Germany. But it's important to be clear. It was illegally here, not legally here, that she was targeting. Okay. The problem with what's happening now with regard to the Home Office letters is that they're going to people who've been here for 30 years. I mean, it's an absolute dog's dinner, but she didn't make the dinner. I guess this is the root of my sympathy for her, is that Brexit has been handed to her by people who are essentially dishonest, dissembling, deceitful, foreign secretaries and the like, and she is doing her best to make a fist of it. And I don't know whether this is me being casually chauvinistic, casually sexist. I don't think she's in the job because of her vanity or her ego now. I think she's genuinely staying in the job because she thinks all of the alternatives are worse. However bad this reality is, she genuinely believes that any alternative reality, whether it's Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn in charge, is worse. I think she might be right, for the record. But if that is her motivation, that makes her... I hate the way this word is traduced and abused by racists, but it's important to remember the true meaning of the word. That makes her a patriotic Prime Minister.
I can't really disagree with the rest of your argument there. I sort of agree with everything you've said there. But then it points back to her vanity election, the way she stood there on the podium to say that she's a strong and stable leadership and she's being rammed by the lunatics. Yeah, but even then, she thought that an enhanced majority would put Brexit to bed. She knows, because she's at heart, she's a Remainer, like anybody sensible and honest. She knows now that it probably has to happen, or the Tory party will tear itself to shreds while in power. And in order to make it happen, she also knows that she has to go sort of peak denial. And the only way she could go peak denial was with a big parliamentary majority. If she could turn around at every corner and say to her inner voice, which knows leaving the European Union is a disastrous decision for this country, she could actually say to her inner voice, yes, I know, but we have no choice. The election was designed to remove choice, to remove the glimmer of hope in the rational camp, or the Remain camp, if you prefer. She wanted to snuff out that glimmer of hope because it's the only way she can drive through whatever disastrous deal she's going to have to pretend isn't disastrous. And that's democracy. Oh, sorry.
No, go on, I'm off on one. You fill your bar. You talk for a while now. I need to shut up.
No, not at all. I agree with everything you said there, but it's not just abdicating, in a sense, democracy, because she wanted a massive majority so she could run through anything she wanted without being questioned. And that goes back to my point there again, where she sort of, you know, and I hate bringing up Brexit because it's sort of frustrating because in a sense I'm personally affected by it. But at the same time, you look at you go back to the courts again, when the courts, I think it was the Gina Miller case where they talked about Article 50, where have to have sort of parliamentary agreement, and it goes back to the judicial system where that was sort of denigrated in a sense by the right-wing, you know, media lunatics in a sense. And she, like in a sense, if I'm looking for someone that's human and strong, she really should have came out and said something, do that to protect the sovereignty of Parliament, but she didn't, which again, that sort of frustrates me to go, no, I have no sympathy for her, because as Prime Minister, she should have some sort of strength, some sort of, I think,
well, do you know what you're saying? And this plays into my worldview quite neatly, but Jeremy Corbyn's conference speech actually addressed this view directly. What you're saying, if I were to conflate all of the excellent points you've made, most of which are much stronger than anything I'm managing to muster at the moment, you're saying she needs to stand up to the editor of the Daily Mail.
Which is bananas in a sense.
I know.
And that to me, I can't understand why she needs to stand up to them. I don't get that. She's the Prime Minister, for crying out loud.
Jeremy Corbyn, I think, the first politician, first party leader in living memory to use his conference speech to tell the Daily Mail to get stuffed. Even Ed Miliband. I mean, they called his father a traitor. They called his dead father the man who hated Britain. I think he fought in the war, Miliband's dad, Ralph. Dacre called him the man who hated Britain. And these scumbags cash their cheques while traducing the memories of decent dead people. That's why she can't stand up to them, David, because they fight dirty.
Scary. It's almost like she's like sort of the Darth Vader, and like, you know, Darth Dacre above is almost like the Emperor, isn't it? It's a bit of Star Wars. Yeah, I don't want to use a Star Wars analogy, but that's how I feel about it. So, like, my point really was I've just got zero sympathy.
I know, and I'm going to carry on fighting, ploughing this lonely furrow, but I'm going to keep taking calls like David's as well. 0345 606 0973 to continue the Star Wars analogy. You're listening to James Obi-Wan Kenobi on LBC. It's 11:31, and I feel I owe you an apology. Phones are absolutely nuts, and I keep talking. I'm trying to work out my own political position at the moment. I've shared with you quite a lot my frustration at being homeless, but I should probably work it out by listening to what you have to say rather than by constantly going around in my own little conversational circles. This is obviously advice to myself that I will forget in the course of the next 4 minutes, but hey, it's the thought that counts. James is in Coventry. James, what do you think happened yesterday?
Well, let me start by saying that I do a lot of public speaking in a number of different contexts, and I actually thought, in light of the pressure she was under, in light of the guy approaching with the P45, and as you said, that puts in your mind, you know, all sorts of anxieties, that as you're speaking to a packed conference hall with the cameras rolling live on Sky News, and I just thought, like, for her to get through that with all of the barriers that stood in her way, the cough, and that she managed to get through to the end of her speech was admirable. And it actually shows some kind of...
And also pitiable. And that's the problem. And pity kills politicians.
Here's the point, James. Yesterday, you know, your political correspondent, Theo, I believe his name is, he made the point that the last thing that she needs is for people to feel sorry for her. Now, I didn't vote for Theresa May.
No.
I'm not a particular fan of the Conservative government. Having said that, she is the person that's in power. And my thought is that if she isn't able to deliver a speech like that, for whatever reason, and it's not just that speech, I think we've seen through the course of the election campaign and, you know, during the course of the interviews that she did on her run-up to the speech at the UN, and then also just recently in the run-up to the conference,
yes,
her ability to deal with questions, to communicate, to inspire people is seriously lacking.
It's pitiful, not pitiable, is it? It's pitiful.
It's pitiful, and you're right. But the issue from my mind is that in the place that we're in, we've got people waiting in the wings, like Herr Boris Johnson, your mate Nigel, at LBC. These are powerful communicators, whether you like what they say or not.
Well, no, of course. The demagoguery is historically dangerous. Everybody knows that.
So surely what we actually need is a leader who is able to hold the country together, let alone her party together. We had all those attacks last summer, then we had Grenfell. Are we just one serious disaster away from this country tearing itself to pieces, let alone the Tory party?
And here's the thing. I mean, I'm always honest on the radio, but I'm also susceptible to persuasion. And I've just been sent a piece Ian Dunt wrote for the politics website that he edits. And he makes the point that the speech at conference last year was vile. It was just dust off kind of nativistic UKIPpery, and she thought that would be enough to get her over the line, and the election showed her. So he writes about her essentially embracing liberalism yesterday, quoting Joe Cox, talking about us being stronger together, focusing on what we have in common. But if you compare that to the speech from last year, that's a U-turn. That's 180 degrees. That's a full pirouette. And that is a reason why perhaps I'm being an idiot, because if she can do both of those speeches in the space of a year, then you have no idea what she stands for. But she probably stands closer to what she said when she was in a position of some strength than what she said when she was in a position of weakness, like she was yesterday.
And the irony of, as the letters were falling off the sign behind her, like the Tory dream that she's talking about. It's a dream of Britain. We're sleepwalking into a nightmare, let alone a dream.
Is it her dream? That's the problem. I think that's where my sympathy comes from. What are her choices? Does she stand up and say, I'm Prime Minister, charged with delivering something that I consider to be an act of national self-harm, which would be the truth? Or does she think the way I can make it as less bad as possible, because that's where British politics has been taken now, into the position where we're all desperately hoping that things... You've already heard it from people who used to tell us Brexit was going to be brilliant. They're now saying, well, we might not absolutely disappear off the face of the earth. We might survive. Ha-ha, stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Ramona's. So her mission, she sees it as providing the least bad outcome of all the available options. And she probably looks at the field and thinks, who else could do that? Who else is going to be honest enough privately and... what's the word I'm looking for? Well, strong and stable enough publicly to deliver the least bad option while simultaneously pretending that it's a good thing. Mate, you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, James.
But do you not think that, look, we saw with the Leave campaign that it was a pack of lies. They've been exposed since.
Yeah, but there's still hundreds of thousands, millions of people who don't feel that the lies have been exposed. The people will say, will of the people, or they say, don't you understand democracy? They're the guys that would buy the hair restoring lotion and the snake oil from people 100 years ago.
Yeah, amen, snake oil, yeah. But I mean, the point being that she has the podium with which to address these things. And if she's not prepared to stand up and do what is right for the country, what is best for the country, and be prepared to be annihilated for that purpose,
do you know how, in the context of democracy and that very tight result last June, how do you know what is best for the country? It might be that the disaster you predict, the apocalypse you fear, would be caused by... pulling the plug on Brexit. You just don't know. There are prominent people in this country who've talked of expecting to see weapons on the street. I think one of my... somebody who works here has talked about putting on khaki, haven't they, in the event of Brexit stopping, while simultaneously bleating about hate speech from others.
Surely, though, the point is that we are currently in a place where we have the ability to control immigration. Our economy is far better inside the single market. That's a known quantitative.
Traitor.
What we're talking about is going out, and she's like, if we could fall apart if we don't do... I mean, come on, let's...
Stop talking the country down. Haven't you seen the latest news from America about Donald Trump's administration trying to block the WTO-based deal that we're seeking to strike with the EU?
Well, there you are. Well, let's be inspired by his eminent leadership.
Let's indeed be inspired by his eminent leadership. Grabbing them by the proverbials. Ashley is in Rutland. Ashley, what's going on?
Hi, James. First-time caller.
Well, very good to hear your voice. I was expecting a male voice. Ashley's one of those names, isn't it? You never know which way you're going to go. What do you want to say? What happened yesterday?
Oh, I did feel sorry for her in the end, I have to say. I saw on my Facebook news feed that someone had handed her a P45 as a prank, and I clicked on it and thought, that's going to be funny. And it was painful to watch. I did actually feel sorry for her at the end of it, because this is a woman's career sort of crumbling before your eyes, and just on a human level, I did kind of feel really sorry for her in that moment.
Let me give you some of the reasons why you shouldn't be, just from my inbox at the moment, from my Twitter feed at the moment. I get it. I must get it right, actually. She was Home Secretary during a referendum on mostly immigration. She said nothing she kept hidden. Repeated attempts to repeal the Human Rights Act entirely. Support for Section 28 against both hunting and smoking bans. Yeah, she's really nice. I don't think she's inherently evil, but she is weak, and her inaction on unfair or failing policies counters any sympathy. Wayne, quoting Tony Benn, two kinds of politicians, signposts and weather vanes. She's the latter. Gary, would a patriotic Prime Minister really put party before country by dragging us all over the cliff into this abyss with her? No. And MJ puts it best, perhaps. I'm really struggling with this one, mate. So there's a lot of reasons why people should be glad to see a career crumbling beneath her feet.
Yeah, and that's why when I clicked on the link and thought I was going to find it funny, it was because of all those reasons, because I'm a Labour voter. I didn't want her to win the general election. I would have been quite happy. Well, I was happy that we got, well, not that we got a whole parliament, but that she didn't get the stonking majority that she wanted.
Yes.
But just seeing that woman's sort of dream of being a Prime Minister and all of her, I don't know, just watching that kind of crumble, it was pretty hard to watch.
I think we're in similar boats then, not necessarily politically, but just on a personal level. You're just not made in a way that could derive genuine pleasure from what you saw yesterday. It's a step too far with Schadenfreude.
Yeah, and I thought I would find it funny, but I actually did feel quite.
Well, the P45 thing works on paper until you imagine somebody, you know, marching up to a politician in a public place and handing them something altogether more sinister than a piece of paper.
Yeah, but then on top of that, knowing that, you know, you're speaking to a room full of people that are really doubtful about your position at the minute as well, and that was her moment to shine and to kind of prove that she can carry on, and I don't know. It's
interesting. I think that the biggest fly in the ointment of my empathy, and this is why your politics provides you with a different perspective from your actual personality, which is always interesting, important to remember that, is that observation about last year's conference speech, where she went for the full-on citizens of the world are citizens of nowhere. She went, you know, peak 1950s, because I guess post-Brexit she thought that that's where the power lay, with kind of elderly racists who've been tempted back into the Conservative Party from UKIP by the referendum, by Brexit, and she possibly hears their voices more loudly than any others, which is why she thought that the majority in the general election would be increased by pandering to their prejudices, and the opposite happened. She got a very tough lesson. 11:46 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Ashley, what a sparkling debut. Who will be next? Do you know what happens when children go to the authorities to make allegations of being sexually abused and the authorities ignore them? Rotherham. That's what happens. Not exactly a difficult relationship to map, is it? You read either of the reports into the grooming gangs in the north of England and you'll see that the police repeatedly turned away for a variety of reasons, one being not believing these children, the second being somehow believing that it's capable, a child under the age of 16 is capable of giving consent in a meaningful way. Legally, of course, they're not remotely capable of giving consent. And the third main reason why these children were not believed was because of their background and the fact that a lot of them came from humble beginnings or had been in care. Those are the three reasons. I know that if you're looking for, you know, grist to your racist mill, you're not supposed to read the actual reports. You're just supposed to bang on about brown people and Muslims, but those are the real reasons. So when young people come to the authorities with allegations of being abused and are not listened to and are not believed and are not treated with respect and decency, those are the kind of things that happen. So this Ted Heath story needs to be viewed through quite a few different prisms. I'm going to show you one of them first, which is an interview given by a former whip in the Conservative Parliamentary Party in about 1995, but referring back to decades previous. I think his name is Peter Fortescue. He's no longer with us, but this is what he had to say in about 1995.
With any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth and say, no, I'm in a jam, can you help? It might be debt, it might be a scandal involving small boys, or any kind of scandal which a member seemed likely to be mixed up in. They'd come and ask if we could help, and if we could, we did. And we would do everything we can, because we would store up brownie points. That sounds a pretty nasty reason, but it's one of the reasons. Is if we can get a chap out of trouble, then he'll do as we ask forevermore.
I think that we should play that on this radio station every single time that anybody, me or any of my colleagues, begin to discuss the allegations that have been made against Ted Heath and found by an inquiry conducted by Wiltshire Police to have been sufficient for him to be interviewed under caution were he still alive. I'm going to play it to you again because an awful lot of effort is going to be put in by the usual suspects to be pretending that there's nothing to see here, and because it's a posh old white bloke, he should be treated completely differently when accused of raping children than a poor brown taxi driver. Peter Fortescue, Senior Whip, Ted Heath's government, 1970 to 1973. Listen out for the phrase small boys.
With any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth and say, no, I'm in a jam. Can you help? It might be debt. It might be a scandal involving small boys, or any kind of scandal which a member seemed likely to be mixed up in. They'd come and ask if we could help. And if we could, we did. And we would do everything we can, because we would store up brownie points. That sounds a pretty nasty reason, but it's one of the reasons. Is if we can get a chap out of trouble, then he'll do as we ask forevermore.
Scandal involving small boys. Okay, that's the context through which this story has to be discussed by honest and decent people. Ted Heath is no longer here to defend himself. Posthumous reckonings are always slightly ugly because of that simple fact. But when you have 14 forces investigating... Well, Charlotte Gay has been at that police conference in Swindon today and joins me now to go through some of the details. Can we start with numbers, Charlotte, if you would? It's the number of allegations, the number of formerly young people who've come forward to speak, the number of forces that have reported receiving allegations against the former Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a £1.5 million report that found there were allegations that the former Prime Minister would face if he were alive today about raping and indecently assaulting boys as young as 10. Now, Wiltshire Police carried out this 2-year investigation. They're keen to stress that today's summary doesn't necessarily mean that Sir Edward Heath would have been found guilty, but that wasn't even their remit to find innocent or guilt anyway. So 40 people made allegations across 14 police force areas. 7 of them were seen as credible enough that they would have led to police interviewing the former Prime Minister under caution. None of the allegations relate to the time when Sir Edward Heath was actually serving as a Prime Minister between 1970 and 1974. And the fact that Sir Edward Heath died at his home in Salisbury in 2005 means there will be no criminal trial against him. So the offences are the ones that he would have been questioned for: 1 allegation of raping a male under 16, 3 allegations of indecent assault on a boy under 16, 4 allegations of indecent assault on a boy under 14, and 2 allegations of indecent assault on a boy over 16. So these allegations spanned over 4 decades, the 40 that came in, the earliest being in 1961. And of course, this means evidence is incredibly hard to come by. As well as speaking to the victims, police spoke to Edward Heath's personal security officers, his drivers, his personal staff. They even read through a number of his personal papers and private notes. During the investigation, 3 people were arrested, people who are obviously alive today, and 1 remains under investigation, but there will be no criminal trial going ahead. Sir Edward was the most high-profile political figure to be linked to these child sex abuse allegations across Westminster. His family and his friends say today that this report has been unsatisfactory. They say all along Sir Edward was completely asexual, and child sex abuse allegations were totally uncharacteristic and unlikely.
So 7 alleged victims whose accounts would warrant interview under caution, 19 cases where he would not have been interviewed under caution because of the extent of what I believe they call undermining evidence.
That's correct. It's for various reasons, like they found, like you say, undermining evidence. There were some cases where I think they believed it was 2 people they believed to be intentionally misleading the police, and there have been cases also of mistaken identity. So there were many cases where they wouldn't have gone on ahead to have been questioned for. And
not just among his sort of family and friends, but some fairly widespread unhappiness. We may talk to Theo Ushwood about this in a moment, from latter-day Conservatives who feel that some sort of witch hunt has been undertaken here.
Well, this morning, MP for the local area, James Gray, was speaking on Nick Ferrari's show, obviously saying that he felt that this was an unnecessary inquiry to have gone ahead. So yes, as you said, there are people today even who still don't believe that Sir Edward Heath could have been linked to these kinds of allegations.
Charlotte Gray, great stuff. I know you've been locked in that room all morning with that 100-page report. We will no doubt talk again as this story garners the attention it deserves. I'm going to bore you rigid playing you that clip from Tim. His name's Tim, not Peter. Tim Fortescue, a whip in Heath's government, talking about how if an MP, a Conservative MP, came to them, this doesn't impute or affect to Ted Heath's guilt or innocence. It merely paints the picture of what that party was like. I'm not suggesting for a minute the Labour Party would have been any different in the first 3 years of the 1970s, okay? That is what you need to remember. All these scumbags writing stuff like Jimmy Savile is still dead. I don't know where that motivation comes from. Some child comes forward, in this case 7 alleged victims whose account would warrant interviewing. If you've got a problem with that happening with regard to Ted Heath, then you're on the same side as of the people that didn't do it in the north of England when children came forward to tell the police that they'd been abused by gangs of largely Pakistani grooming gangs. The crime is the same. The colour, the ethnicity, the background of the alleged culprit, if that is what you base your reaction to a story on, there's a word for people like you. The word I use for any abuser of children is child abuser. I don't care about any other aspect of their makeup. So politically, this is the world Ted Heath inhabited.
With any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth. They'd say, no, I'm in a jam. Can you help? It might be debt. It might be a scandal involving small boys or any kind of scandal which a member seemed likely to be mixed up in. They'd come and ask if we could help. And if we could, we did. And we would do everything we can, because we would store up brownie points. That sounds a pretty nasty reason, but it's one of the reasons. Is if we can get a chap out of trouble, then he'll do as we ask forevermore.
So 19 cases with undermining evidence, but 7 individual victims whose accounts would warrant interviewing him under caution. Theo Usherwood is here. Was that a fair reflection of the modern Conservative Party when I think the phrase, perhaps the word, is pushed back? There's some profound unhappiness about this investigation, even before its findings were published. There was profound unhappiness about it even occurring.
Before I come on to that, can I just pick up on something that was mentioned, and you played that clip, storing up brownie points by the Whip's office. And for any of your listeners who are unclear as to what that means...
They're your listeners as well, Theo.
It's very generous. But what that means, James, is that the government has to get a piece of legislation through. They have to get the votes for it to get a piece of legislation through at the time. And there may be some rebels. And then they could then go to somebody who's approached them with allegations of that, and you say, well, hang on a moment, chap. Do you want that to come out? Would you like that to be made public? Well, I suggest you get in line and vote for us.
That's precisely what he meant. It's
that's exactly what
you need to clarify, because it almost beggars belief.
So that's why he says it may be slightly, I forget the phrase, but, you know, in effect implying it's slightly distasteful to talk about it in those terms. But you're right, there is pushback. People are unhappy because they're questioning the need to have this report. Why have it? If there's going to be no criminal trial, what is the purpose? What purpose is it serving, except to slur the name of a former British Prime Minister, a former Conservative British Prime Minister? And that's why there's a huge amount of unease in the Lords and amongst senior Tory grandees about this. Now, of course, this will go back to the investigation into historical allegations of sexual abuse that was set up by Theresa May in 2015. I listened to part of the statements from the police today. They were very, very defensive, trying at every turn to justify why they've come to publish these details, what the reasoning for it, and why it was necessary. And that's in part, at least, because they know that they are going to be criticised for conducting the investigation in the first place. And of course, the police, from their point of view, they feel that they have a duty to the victims and those people that they spoke to.
And that's the short answer. It doesn't matter whether the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, is alive or dead. The police are attempting to give confidence to people coming forward. And recent events in the north of England suggest that the confidence in coming forward is something that needs to be very carefully nurtured and encouraged by the authorities rather than, dare I say, discouraged by elderly white journalists who normally lean to the right. 16 minutes after 12. Stay where you are. We're sort of juggling with two profoundly different political stories involving Conservative Prime Ministers. One present Prime Minister, Theresa May, and just really trying to unravel with the help of Theo Usherwood what the hell is going on. The sense of turmoil seems to be recognised by everybody except those closest to the Prime Minister, which is as close to a definition of terrifying as I've ever managed to get in the context of a political discussion. And then a past Prime Minister, Ted Heath, who an exhaustive and controversial investigation by Wiltshire Police has found 7 alleged victims of sex abuse by the former Prime Minister, tell stories that would merit interviewing him under caution were he still alive. And that, for reasons that I think we've pinned down fairly precisely, is apparently controversial, even in the context of the tragedies in the north of England, where the failure of police to listen properly to children alleging abuse led to these grooming gangs going unchecked for the best part of 2 decades. When it's in Westminster, people who, in my profession, would be at the front of the queue of those decrying the police in South Yorkshire are strangely silent when it comes to what the police should do, or even suggesting the police shouldn't invest allegations made by children who were alive at the time when that senior whip, Tim Fortescue, was describing scandals, including small boys. One of the things we could help with, brownie points. And as Theo Usherwood just explained, the brownie points translates as, if you don't vote the way we want you to vote, that story about you and the small boys might actually end up in the news of the world on Sunday. That is just reality. That's how it happened. So you need to ask yourself this question. You need to ask yourself, if you hear a relatively wealthy, almost certainly white, and probably quite powerful, either in the political world or the media world, if you hear somebody powerful, wealthy and white complaining about an investigation into sex crimes allegedly committed by somebody very powerful, wealthy and white, you have to ask yourself why that old, powerful, wealthy person might not want allegations about sexual misbehaviour and sex crimes committed decades ago to be properly investigated. In what circumstances would you not want allegations made by, several people, 7 with credible stories? In what possible circumstances would you not want those stories to be investigated? Yeah. Funny that, isn't it? Back to Theresa May, Theo Usherwood. The odds on her going before the end of next year is barely worth having a bet on.
Quite right. And why would you have a bet on? I had a conversation with somebody very close to Theresa May during this last conference, and they described their aim at the moment is to try and pick out what's important. They compared it to driving from Heathrow to central London, and the fact is that you could say you could take 30 minutes, the way it was explained to me, and then it ends up taking an hour and a half because of the bumps along the way. And they know that it's not going to be easy. And their point would be that you have to allow that. You have to factor time in. Brexit is going to be incredibly difficult to deliver. And so rather than just saying I can do it in 30 minutes, you actually take an hour and a half and you allow that time. But the problem with that analogy is you take it another step further, and the roadworks and the congestion just becomes part of the narrative. It is what the political landscape actually looks like. And there is no prospect of a cycle superhighway being completed, or fewer cars on the road, or whatever it is that is causing the hold-ups. The hold-ups become the story, and that's what they can't get away from. And that's the difficulty, and that will be, I'm sure, factored into Theresa May's mind, that she's busted. It's done. It's finished. It's over.
And Brexit means there's no magic bullet on the horizon. There's no, because economically and internationally, things are only going to get worse. So it's not as if she can even think, oh, well, if we can hang in there for 6 months, we'll be able to announce this, that, or the other. The best announcements they're going to have are things are only going to, in the best case scenario, things are only going to be a bit worse than they are when we're in the European Union. That's the best they've got. They're never going to be able to say life is going to be better. What can she bring to the country that will say, as a result of my stewardship, this, and this will improve?
before Boris Johnson made his intervention, there was a tension, but there was simply one negotiation between Britain and the European Union when it came to Brexit. What Boris did was he entered a third equation to that. So Theresa May now finds herself negotiating between two different parties who want two completely different things. And that's the difficulty that she faces, is that how can she reconcile that difference? And if she shrugs her shoulders, or Philip May comes over, or whoever comes over to her and says, actually, we can't do this is impossible, then what's the point of carrying on?
Well, then you're accused of talking the country down and being a traitor. This is why I feel sorry for her. Steve is in Nottingham. You don't think I should feel sorry for her, Steve?
No, James, not at all. I've got very, very little sympathy for her, but that also doesn't mean that I took any pleasure in what I listened to.
No.
Yesterday, I simply believe it's kind of karma catching up with her, and I actually think you're being a little bit, arguably a bit condescending to women. If you don't mind me saying so.
I preferred the phrase benign chauvinism, but that's probably proving your point, not mine.
No, I agree with you at 99% of what you say, but I think on this occasion
I do her a disservice, don't I? It's a bit like sort of trying to find out whether she's burst into tears or not. Well, there's no way you'd do that with a man. It's not sexist as such, but I think condescending might actually be the word.
Well, when I did find myself starting to laugh at what was happening, I really did stop myself, and I really did try and pull myself back. But it just seemed as though it was all kind of predestined and it was going to go wrong. I really thought she was going to run off the stage in tears at one point. And if she had have done that, she might have garnered even more support in a funny sort of way.
It's not support, though, is it? It's pity. It feels like support. It looks a little bit like support. But in the final analysis, it's not support. It's pity. And as Theo said yesterday, politicians never, ever, ever want pity.
No, absolutely not.
Who is she, do you think? Is she the person, I mean, genuinely, in her heart of hearts, that she can't just flop all over the place? She's either the politician who stood up last year and attempted to throw red meat to the elderly racists who had been tempted back into the fold from UKIP, or she's the politician who stood up yesterday and invoked the memory of Joe Cox. You can't really think of two positions that are further apart, and perhaps to compound my condescension, my naivety leads me personally to the conclusion that the real Theresa May was the one we saw yesterday. How on earth I can then forgive her for the speech she made the year before is a question for another day. Which person do you think she is? The one throwing red meat to the racists, or the one citing the memory of Joe Cox?
I'm sorry to say, I'm afraid she's the one throwing red meat to the racists.
Really?
Because she's just blowing that way, yeah. And I think her record as Home Secretary, the 5 years before she became leader, shows that, she was
5 years in which she could have controlled our borders, to use that dreadful phrase that is not meaningless but is completely misunderstood by the entire country, however they voted. We have all the rules in place under the EU for a Home Secretary to put checks and balances in place on a border that would limit the amount of people that come here looking for work, or at least removes people who haven't found work after 3 months. She had that power, and she ignored those reports about the number of students that were going home, didn't she? I mean, the accusation is that she deliberately inflated immigration figures to make political capital.
Absolutely, and to all those things, but also to tie her in with the Edward Heath thing, she is supposed to have lost this file.
Are you sure it was her, not Leon Britton? We'll look into that. There was a file presented by the Conservative MP whose name currently escapes me. Luckily, LBC's political editor is here to fill in the gaps in my memory.
That name also escapes me.
He's a big jolly fellow, passed away. He put together a big dossier. Jeffrey Dickinson, is it? It's not. We're not on legal thin ice because he did good work. No one's going to complain about being unfairly identified as having done some good work. Steve, thank you. Do you buy that, Theo? Sometimes these thoughts occur to us during the course of a call. That 12-month window between Theresa May throwing red meat to the racist wing of the party and a Theresa May yesterday invoking the memory of Joe Cox, kind of like the opposite of throwing red meat to racists. The poor woman got murdered by one. It's a fair distinction, isn't it? She's tried to be both of those people in the space of a calendar year.
I think there's a feeling in politics at the moment that I've picked up on, and it comes about with I think other tectonic plates that are moving, especially around Labour, that facts and detail no longer matter. and that you can get away with saying anything, and you can simply get away with it. The other thing I would say is that, listening to that call, and many of your listeners, and you may say as well, is that if you're going to invoke the memory of Jo Cox, if you're going to be that person, then you need to have the principle and the leadership not to fall into the trap of invoking racism.
You can't do both.
But because that's something that you don't believe in and you think's wrong, and therefore you're going to stand up against it.
And
not use it because it's politically expedient.
No, which is clearly what she did. And there are some lines you never cross in pursuit of power or support or cheers at conference, and those lines would probably involve the citizens of the world, the citizens of nowhere stuff. And Julian Suffolk reminds us that Nick Clegg has accused her of manipulating immigration figures when she was at the Home Office to make the problem look worse than it actually was, which, you know, it doesn't quite put her on the same page as a proper racist liar like Farage, but it certainly puts her in the position of having fostered xenophobic climates.
And they've always kept that target, that tens of thousands, cutting immigration to the tens of thousands. And it was David Cameron's pledge, of course, back in just before 2010, the 2010 election. But rather than simply ditch that, Theresa May stuck by it, and of course the student numbers as well in keeping those in the grand total of net migration. She didn't abandon it, she kept it.
And why would politicians in power be keen for the public to believe lies and exaggerations about immigration? Answer, because then the politicians in power don't get the blame for things going wrong in hospitals or schools or on the roads or up and down the country. Why would a politician not in power, for example, who's failed to win a seat in Parliament for 7 separate occasions, encourage the public to believe lies and exaggerations about immigration? Because he'll end up with a job here. And what a tangled web we weave. Looking at the current, the modern political landscape, you find yourself wondering what the hell Theresa May can actually do. She's essentially trying to spin plates, some of these plates are just utter lies. So she's trying to somehow placate people who've fallen for a whole bunch of Brexit lies, while simultaneously putting together a deal in the real world with our former European Union partners that won't leave us, frankly, with our face pressed up against the window of international trade and a begging bowl in our hands. Latest news in the FT, which isn't necessarily as significant as some Remain commentators would have you believe. The latest news in the FT today sees America trying to block a kind of proposal under WTO rules that would allow Britain and its former EU partners to share quotas. It would be a one way of ducking tariffs, but America doesn't like it, because America should have as much right to sell its chlorinated chicken into Britain post-Brexit as France currently has to sell its carefully curated chicken. These are the points that nobody understands. I think Theresa May does understand some of them, but she's dealing with the wing of her party that either doesn't understand them or pretends not to. That's the only mystery now. How many of these people are too dumb to understand it, and how many of them are clever enough to understand it but pretending not to, because the cheers, the nativistic cheers of the forelock-tugging mob remain so loud? That's where Jacob Rees-Mogg comes in. There's no political context into which Jacob Rees-Mogg could stride effortlessly, except one almost defined by forelock-tugging and deference. Oh, it's not, I don't know our place. He's English and he's posh. That must be better than having, I don't know, somebody who's neither English nor posh in charge. Absolutely, and that's where we are. What the hell can she do? I feel so sorry for her. I really do. The Ted Heath question, which we might move on to tomorrow, but I'd love you to have a crack at answering it now. Why is there a fat vein of British opinion that is sceptical when people accuse rich, famous men of child abuse? I'm not going to necessarily conflate it with the speed and alacrity with which people rush to condemn poor brown men accused of child abuse. But the story for me here, the Ted Heath story and the grooming gangs in the north of England story in the Midlands, is identical. These are stories about how the police should react to people coming to them with claims of being abused. And I hesitate to use the R word again, but I can't come up with any answer whatsoever, except something even worse, which is, if I was a posh white bloke who had abused children in the past, I would be passionately against investigations into allegations made by people about historic child sexual abuse. Of course I would, because it might be me next getting named and held up. I'd be very careful when you say that about what you say next, because it might sound as if you're suggesting that this specific person who's sceptical about allegations or accusations brought against rich white men is themselves complicit or guilty of something similar in the past. So we'll park that subject completely now. And I'm not for a moment suggesting that any names that I mentioned between now and 1 o'clock are befitting of the description of some theoretical fictional person you've just heard me make. But what is the difference? How should the police react to people coming forward with allegations of child sex abuse? You want to talk about Ted Heath? You remember that quote from Tim Fortescue that I've played you now 3 or 4 times. So that is a question I'd love you to have a go at answering. 0345 6060 973. Is this almost institutional scepticism motivated by anything other than self-interest and or deference? Oh, he's famous, he can't possibly be. He presented Jim will Fix It. He can't possibly be the pervert he's being portrayed at. He was on It's a Knockout. He can't possibly be the pervert he's being portrayed. He was rich and famous and on Radio 1. He can't possibly be the pervert. He was Prime Minister. He can't possibly... Rich, but rich, famous white people don't do these things. Actually, they do. On an industrial scale, history suggests. Brown poor people, when they do it, the reaction from some quarters of the country, the furiously hard of thinking, is completely different. Can you work out why? 0345 6060 973. Gareth is in Birmingham. Back to Theresa May, Gareth. Strange show today. There's a lot going on. What would you like to say?
Oh, it's been just a bizarre week. I mean, with the variety of things in the news. I mean, Monday just hit me like a ton of bricks. Right, so... I do share your sympathy for Theresa May, perhaps not in the same way because she's a woman or anything, but that she's in a situation which is basically enviable by no one, really. But the thing for me is that I agree with something you said a couple of days ago, or maybe it was yesterday, about her being too weak to be sacked.
Yes.
Because of the surrounding situation. The thing is... Oh, they'd
get rid of her in an instant if they thought it would enhance the party's position in the country and or in Parliament.
Exactly. Well, the thing is, I think it's kind of like what the Conservatives technically need is another Theresa May in the waiting, but there is no other.
You mean a safe pair of hands that's actually safer than the last safe pair of hands?
Yes. Well, the thing, I'm listening to people like Nigel Farage saying, do you know what? I think Jacob Rees-Mogg would be a great.
Right, I haven't heard him say that, so I'll take your word for it. Nothing would surprise you with that character.
I think that he would be he would show a he would put forward a true conservative plan and all this. Well,
doffs cap, tugs forelock, goes a little weak at the knees at what a minor public school boy thinks a major public school boy looks like.
Well, let's not forget that people ignored the young vote. It was ignoring the young vote that lost the Tories a hell of a lot of votes. If they put someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg in power, they'll be doing it again. Because that will...
I don't think anybody serious... I don't think anybody serious is suggesting that. The alternatives will... Go on.
The only names that I'm hearing is Jacob and Boris.
Well, you need to get out more. You need to get out more. I mean, Amber Rudd is widely regarded as having a good crack of the whip, and then you've got the slightly more outsider ones like Dominic Raab, who has some following within the party. Adam Afriyie. David Davis might fancy it. The best description I've seen of him was that he'd be exactly like Theresa May and just as incompetent regarding Brexit, but he'd be a lot more cheerful about it, which might buy them another 6 months of forgiveness. But this. We shouldn't laugh.
He's being slated so much for his negotiation work that if it was a second effectively Brexit election, I can't see how David Davis, who's perceived to have not done so well so far, would be.
No, but you really need to get out more. There are millions of people who are believing the notion that he's done brilliantly. The evidence is not as important to the decision-making process as people like you and me grew up thinking it was, Gareth. Is it?
I just don't see how some of the. I mean, Amber Rudd, if I remember right, she didn't perform too well during the campaign last time round.
I think she did. She was widely regarded as being one of the winners on the Remain side, someone who emerged from it with their reputation enhanced. But again, I mean, it all stems back to the referendum, when what we just described as evidence-based decision-making was stuck in the corner for at least a generation. It's a strange state of affairs. What would look good to you? Because the thing about Corbyn, and I don't know how often you listen to the programme, but I'm far from I'm far from a member of Jeremy Corbyn's fan club. But it occurs to me, as we describe Theresa May in the space of a year, moving from throwing red meat to the racist nativists that they tempted back from UKIP, and a year later quoting and citing the memory of an MP who was essentially murdered by that same racist mindset. It was taken to its apotheosis by Thomas Mayer, the white supremacist who killed Joe Cox, a serving MP. Theresa May, trying to be both of those people in the space of a year, couldn't strike a starker contrast with Jeremy Corbyn's immutability, his immovability. I mean, whether you love him or loathe him, he sticks to his guns.
He does stick to his guns, and so there is an ideology there that can be held to. But I think, you know, what Theresa May said in that speech, and I doubt many young people were actually listening, and that's something important to remember. But what was said in the speech was probably too much compromise for a lot of Tory voters, and not enough compromise for people who are voting for Corbyn.
You mean she didn't nick enough? She didn't nick enough of his policies.
She didn't. Well, she nicked the policies, but she didn't do enough about them.
No, you might be right, and that sums up politics. And I suspect we're all guilty of this. The energy price cap. If you cheered it when Ed Miliband announced it, you have a moral duty to cheer it when Theresa May announces it. But this sort of tribalism, this binary tribalism that's beset us to such an absurd degree at the moment, means you don't base your attitude to a policy upon what the policy might do. You base it on who said it, and that's the kind of thing we should fight against. Rest assured, this programme will continue to swim against the tide of bovine binary tribalism as effectively and as swiftly and elegantly as it has done for the last couple of years. It's 12:46, and it is, if you're quiet, just be quiet a minute. Do you hear that? That is the sound of right-wing racists' heads exploding at the thought that their defence of Ted Heath and their belief that he shouldn't have been properly investigated over allegations of child sex abuse is exactly the same as the children in the north of England who were let down when police didn't believe or properly investigate their allegations of child sex abuse. Weird, isn't it? If you're quiet, you can hear it. You can hear their little brains struggling to come up with a reason why it's completely different, that doesn't actually sound like, no, hang on, he's posh, rich and white. They're poor and brown. If Ted Heath is guilty of any of the things he stands accused of, he's every bit the pervert that those cab drivers in Rotherham are. Every bit the criminal. How do you investigate? How do you find out? You speak to the people making the allegations. Just be quiet again. You can hear it. There it goes. Boom. Hang on a minute. Mohammed. Yeah, the thing is here, we've got 7 separate accusers who the police believe have stories credible enough to merit interviewing Ted Heath under caution. Yeah, but... So either you want to live in a country where people coming forward alleging that they've been abused as children are treated with respect, decency and compassion by the police, or you don't. If you think that that depends upon what colour or what class the alleged abuser is, then that's your head that just went pop. It's really simple. It really is. It's not even a matter of opinion. You have 2 stories here which involve young people being allegedly abused by adults. And if those young people, either while they're still young or later in life, make their way to the authorities and ask to be listened to, ask for investigation, you either are on their side or you're not. Isn't it odd how the world looks when you get your head out of your backside sometimes? Yeah, but, Quran. No. Have a listen to this from a bloke who was a whip when Ted Heath was Prime Minister, and ask me why EDL websites aren't dedicated to this bloke.
With any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth and say, no, I'm in a jam, can you help? It might be debt, it might be a scandal involving small boys, or any kind of scandal which a member seemed likely to be mixed up in. They'd come and ask if we could help. And if we could, we did. And we would do everything we can, because we would store up brownie points. That sounds a pretty nasty reason, but it's one of the reasons. Is if we can get a chap out of trouble, then he'll do as we ask forevermore.
Where are all the websites? Where are all the proud patriots attacking that happened on our own doorstep and was revealed by a former member of Parliament. For the record, I feel sorry for him, his legacy, because he was living in a world where these things were not treated in the way that they should be treated. But isn't it very odd that people who seem to dedicate their lives on social media to pursuing Pakistani paedophile grooming gangs are on the same side of the argument when it comes to Ted Heath as the people who didn't listen to the victims? Strange times. What could possibly be the reason why a brown-skinned person would demand epic derision and disgust, but a white-skinned person accused of identical crimes shouldn't even be investigated at all? Anybody? I'm just trying to think. Here's a brown fella accused of abusing children. Here's a white fella. Why would your reaction to those two accusations be so completely and fundamentally different? Maybe it's not race, okay. So let's make it about class. Here's a northern taxi driver. Here's the presenter of Jim Will Fix It. Here's a Radio 1 DJ. Here's a takeaway worker in the north. Why would those two people accused of identical crimes be treated so differently by anyone? I hesitate to say this out loud because it sounds a little self-serving, but how can anybody look at these stories in a different way from how I do? How can you be more or less disgusted by the actions of the grooming gangs in the north of England as you are by the actions of the sort of showbiz circles in which Jimmy Savile moved and abused children on an industrial scale? It's weird, that, isn't it? It's almost as if the class or the colour of the culprit, the alleged culprit, is more important than the crime or the allegations of the victim. If only there was a word for that, for thinking that the colour of somebody's skin is more important than what they've actually done. I just can't think of one. So where do you think this scepticism in my industry and in politics comes from when rich, old, white men are accused of abusing children historically? Where does it come from? Why would you not want to investigate the victims? One answer to that is sometimes the victims, the alleged victims, turn out not to be telling the truth, which was apparently the case with this character called Nick, whose accusations have in many ways set back these investigations enormously. That's the risk you take when you believe people. If it turned out that one kid in the north of England claiming that she'd been groomed hadn't been, would you suddenly call off the investigation into all of the other allegations? Of course you wouldn't. So why would you use that example as a reason why we shouldn't be investigating establishment cover-ups, especially when I played you the tape of a former whip describing the cover-ups that he, as a member of an establishment, undertook? Tony's in Wimbledon. Strange times, Tony. Can you answer any of those questions? If you can, you're a better man than me.
I will certainly just try. I think a lot of it just can be summed up. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This country is Britain, England's majority white country. The ruling elite of this country for the last 1,000 years have been white on the whole. I think when we hear of incidents like this, I think a lot of it, we have to look back at some of the history of the country. And I mean, specifically this country I'm speaking of, but you can relate it across the world. But certainly we've moved from a system where at one point, not only was the land owned, but the people on the land were owned as well. During the times of feudalism, we've advanced on to the point now that we have a democratic framework, etc., rules of representation. What we're seeing in a situation with what you've just played there is one of the sad, brutal realities of life in some ways, which is quite simply men who are in positions of power and privilege.
And the rest of us tug a forelock when it's power and privilege and react very differently from how we do when it's people who you know, fit into our stereotypes. I'll leave you again with that sound of heads exploding, because all of these people who see themselves as self-styled defenders of the victims of the Rotherham grooming gang suddenly recognising that they've never said a word about all the elderly, rich, powerful white men accused of identical crimes. Almost as if it's being rich, white and powerful that inures you from accusations of child sexual abuse. What a strange world we inhabit. What a tangled web we weave. I would actually quite like to find a sound effect to represent those exploding heads, but you'll just have to have a look at my inbox later and see the metaphorical equivalent. Speaking of bonfires, Let's talk about the Conservative Party. From any angle you want, actually. I find myself at the moment, I don't know how long it's going to last, but the conversations about politics, I'm finding them utterly engrossing, whether I'm sitting in the audience listening to them, whether I've got my radio on listening to other programmes, whether I have the daily privilege of listening to you and indeed talking to you, whether it's just me and Theo Usherwood chewing the fat, which we do off-air in almost an identical fashion to how we do on-air. And I suspect the reason why it's so interesting is because it's so unclear. I'm becoming a little bit beleaguered with political discussion that never goes anywhere, which I guess sort of defines Brexit conversations, doesn't it? This sort of absolute immutability and immovability, despite the evidence changing on an almost daily basis. Yesterday, for example, the German trade body advised its members, this is precisely the trade body that many leavers insisted would force Angela Merkel to do our bidding because our custom was so important. They're now advising their members to prepare for a no-deal Brexit and warning them of the billions that they potentially stand to lose. And German industry sees that as the price they have to pay in order to retain the solidity of the European Union. But hey, who cares? I'm wasting my breath. That's just a fact. It's just an absolute explosion of one of the main reasons people gave for voting to leave the European Union, and it has been proved not to be true. But hey, those people won't change, despite the fact that their main reason for doing it has been shown to be completely bogus. So those conversations are getting tiring, exhausting perhaps. Not these sort of conversations, because one of us will be right, you know. That's the amazing thing about absolute uncharted territory. One of us will be right. What's going to happen next in the Conservative Party? Is Theresa May going to hang in there and somehow attempt to negotiate Brexit from a position of almost unbelievable weakness? People talk about that speech in Florence last week, and most of the coverage I hear fails to mention that our credit rating was downgraded immediately afterwards by Moody's. Immediately afterwards. I think, and this is entirely personal, I have only insight to base this on, no factual evidence. I think that the credit rating explanation is simple. It's this sort of forlorn hope that we might come to our senses and stop it. So every time she does something that makes that appear less likely, that very distant prospect on the horizon drops off the radar, then our financial future becomes, in the minds of the experts, more fraught. So she makes a speech making it clear that we're going to have to roll over on the divorce payment, making it clear that we're going to have to roll over on a couple of other things, but making it clearer that there's no intention yet of slamming on the brakes, and that's when our international credit rating, it's essentially the same as your credit rating. When they decide whether or not you're good for a credit card, they tot up all your points. Prime Minister made a speech about European Union withdrawal, and our qualification criteria to get a credit card from the world went down. Nice simplistic analysis for you there. So she's incredibly weak, and weakened further by Boris Johnson, of course, quite deliberately and almost unbelievably. The word treacherous and traitor get bandied around a lot at the moment, again in the context of Brexit. But if you look at the national interest, let's pretend, okay, that there is a cogent case for cracking on with Brexit. Let's all just pretend that for a minute. And Theresa May is in charge. Right? She makes appointments designed to facilitate that process. You might not have a great deal of faith in her, but she is the captain of the ship, and we've only got one ship. That's the point. She is setting the course of that ship. She is choosing the crew of that ship. And that ship, really, its next and most important port of destination is Brexit. It's the other side of the European Union. Boris Johnson, who claims to want that port to be reached more passionately than anybody else, it's almost as if he's in the engine room trying to sort of knock out the stoker with a hammer or a spanner. He's sort of smacking the bloke round the back of the head who's trying to keep the coal flying into the furnaces to keep the ship going. And I don't understand why. This isn't going to be an hour of trying to unpick the Machiavellian machinations of Boris Johnson's brain. It might turn into that, but that's not where I want to start. I want to start with your views about what is going on in the Conservative Party. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. And the simplest question, which I'd like everyone to have a crack at answering, in many ways, if you are sort of more conservative than not historically, if you vote for them regularly or always. In many ways, I'm more interested in what you've got to say today because, well, I suppose in a sense you're closer to the engine room. You're in the car, whereas the rest of us are watching it. What would you say happens next? Should we just do that, actually? Maybe park the slightly more complicated analysis for a while and just do the predictions? Would you mind getting your crystal balls out and giving them a polish? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What is going to happen next? We'll do that, okay? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And then subsequently to that, it's a question of whether she will survive. So obviously that's partly contained within the question of what's going to happen next. But why do you think Theresa May is still in position? Why is she still there? Grant Shapps reportedly trying to marshal some sort of rebellion. The problem with Grant Shapps is when you read that he's putting together a list of MPs keen to see Theresa May leave, there's a little bit of you that wonders whether his alter ego Michael Green is putting together a list of MPs who want to see Theresa May stay. Not a name. In fact, I would say the biggest indicator that perhaps any putative rebellion is doomed to fail is the fact that it now has Grant Shapps' name stamped all over it. But it's still there. It's front and centre. You heard him on with Nick earlier. It's the political development of the day. Within, 48 hours of a conference speech, they're talking about deposing the leader. That suggests wherever you were sitting in that conference hall, it did not go well, unless you were Michael Gove, who considered it to have been a brilliant speech from what did he say, from a Prime Minister at the top of her game. That was after she, spluttered and squeaked her way through a speech that no one can remember the detail of because everyone was focusing on the coughing, and then saw letters start falling off the backdrop behind her while she was setting out her credentials for being able to run the country. Michael Gove, a brilliant speech from a Prime Minister at the top of her game. You almost wonder why you bother, don't you, on days like that? So what happens next? 0345 6060 973. And similarly, or subsequently, what do you think? Because there were some simple answers out there, and I think one of them is probably true, is that she's almost hostage to her own weakness now. It's a strange phrase, that, because yesterday I tried to paint Theresa May in a very sympathetic light, and a lot of you are very cross with me, and a lot of the stuff that you sent me after the programme did rather strip away my suggestion that beneath that slightly robotic exterior there may well lurk a truly compassionate woman. Some of the stuff she did at the Home Office, story emerging yesterday about her trying to bring immigration into primary schools, those vans, of course, being associated with some of the abuses visited upon disabled people by the DWP and similar. There's a lot of evidence to the contrary, but I still don't want to believe that the Prime Minister of this country is quite as inadequate as she appeared to be on the conference stage, quite as what's the word I'm looking for? Inconsistent. To move from in the space of a year, to move from that disgusting speech about citizens of nowhere to quoting Jo Cox, a woman who was assassinated for believing in a sort of sense of human equality. That speaks of an incredible weakness of spirit, of resolution, of conviction. And because she doesn't stand for anything, as we've established on this programme in the past, she becomes a sort of a leader in name only. But what's going on behind her? Grant Shapps, Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Do you want your mind to be blown? You look at British politics right now. How long ago do you think Cameron versus Miliband was? David Cameron, general election, versus Ed Miliband. Wasn't even 2.5 years ago. How the country has changed. So we've gone from a relatively well-mannered, the sort of Daily Mail and the Sun coverage notwithstanding, exchange between two relatively straightforward politicians into this absolutely unyielding mess, this complete pit of despondency and despair, unless you are lucky enough to look at Jeremy Corbyn and see a shining light of rectitude, or mad enough to look at Theresa May and see some sort of strength and stability, then you, like me, must just stare at this and find yourself thinking, what the flibbity-gibbet is going on? And that's my final question for you on our final day together this week. What the flibbity-gibbet is going on politically? Can you make sense of it? I may even, because it's Make Some Noise Day, I may even let the odd conspiracy theory on the programme today. First of all, though, you need the phone number, 0345 6060 973. 3. And I'm going to give special prominence to female callers today, because someone pointed out yesterday that we hadn't had many female callers on. It often happens with political discussions. As men think we've got all the answers. Breaking news, we haven't. It's 10:17. Incredibly amateurish of me, but I had quite a late night last night, so I'm going to let you do the heavy lifting. The main question before us this morning is, what the flibberty-gibbet is going on politically, with particular reference, I think, to the Conservative Party. Ruth's in West Hampstead. Ruth, what would you like to say?
Hey, well, I might be veering maybe into conspiracy theories, I don't know. But
I'm in that mood today. Are you in that mood today? I'm in that mood today.
It's all crazy, isn't it? It's crazy.
Exactly. How mad can it really be?
Social media is what's going on, James. I think it's probably, everybody is playing out their political ideas on social media. You've got politicians that use social media. The referendum was won, I think, partly by social media.
Have you seen the piece on
American president?
Yes. Have you read the piece on BuzzFeed about Breitbart and Stephen Bannon and that Milo character?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The one published today is absolutely chilling.
Not the one today,
you've got to go and read it. It's absolutely chilling. It's extremely long, but it confirms and clarifies a lot of the fears and suspicions I've had pretty much for the last couple of years, and many of which you've just reflected. So you're talking about a sort of subversion of reality. So social media allows lies to be halfway around the world before the truth has even charged its batteries.
I don't even know if it's that. I think we've got a population that maybe is not quite as engaged in politics as they should be, in that, they're not really reading the stuff that's out there, and they're basing their opinions on sort of sound bites. And it's like the referendum and the Trump election was, pop idol.
Yeah, I mean, you're being kind, because when this unfortunately, there is a kind of there's a race element to this social media revolution that you describe, and the root of it is manipulation by Russia and a sort of validation or vindication of white supremacist ideology, and that's the only thing that's left. If you look at Trump now, the only thing he's got left is people think that he's opened the door to them being able to do stuff that was considered beyond the pale just 3 years ago. But back in Britain, looking at the Conservative Party, give me a prediction.
Oh, a prediction. Oh, my goodness.
Is she going to be there till Christmas?
Oh, no. But I don't know who could possibly take over from her.
Well, you can't have it both ways. Oh, I suppose you can. It's Boris Johnson's world, after all. You can have it both ways. Yeah, she definitely won't last till Christmas, but I have no idea who will take over from her. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I've got a couple of phone lines free. Crack on with this. I want as many voices as possible. Alan is in Chesterfield. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time caller, so excuse me if I'm a bit nervous.
You're very welcome, Alan. How's the spire?
Oh, it's crooked. Always will be.
Carry on.
In predictions for the future, I think you've got to look at it from the Prime Minister's perspective in her as a person. She's in a position at the moment where she is visibly in power at the behest of the 22 committee. And she's there. She said it herself, I'm there as long as you want me. Now, if she steps down, her political career is finished.
It's finished anyway, isn't it? The ex-Prime Minister's club is... you mean, by political career, you mean sort of career with credibility. You don't mean parliamentary career. You mean what's she going to go on to next? Become some sort of grand dam or similar?
Yeah. But however, if she decides... I mean, there is going to be a leadership election, whether it's in 1 month, 1 week, 6 months or whatever. She's going to have to...
Well, what's the outside limit on that? There's going to be a leadership election... but give me the extent of that. Where there has to be one by X.
I would say there has to be one by the end of the year.
Okay, so by Christmas.
It's because if there is a leadership election, she might win it, and if she wins it, she comes back more powerful. It's the only way she can come back more powerful. If she loses it, she can go back, regroup. She can become Boris Johnson. She can sit on the corners and snipe. And perhaps even go with her true beliefs. But that makes her stronger as a politician within Westminster. Now, her only other option is to carry on and not call a leadership election, where she is then still perceived as only being there because her own backbenchers are allowing her to stay there because there's nobody better to replace her.
How can she lead Brexit negotiations if the people she's negotiating with know that her her power is I was going to say diminished, but under your analysis, it's non-existent.
No, it's non-existent if she doesn't. If she has to call the leadership election, and then she either has to win it or lose it. If she wins it, she can go into Europe stronger than she is now. If she loses
that's what she said last time.
Yeah, but that was a leadership, that was a general election.
Do you not think that if they thought they had a decent chance of doing better tomorrow than they did last month or last election, they'd do it? The one thing I probably hang my hat on at the moment is that they would quite like to make some significant change, whether it's an election within the party or another election across the country, which wouldn't be unprecedented. I think it happened in 76, didn't it, when there was 2 in 1 year?
Yeah, it did.
So if they honestly thought that would do what you described, they'd do it now.
I don't think they'll call a general election now. I think she will call a leadership election before Christmas.
Okay. So if her position, sorry, I misunderstood you. So that would strengthen her position in the party, and then she can go to Brussels with the power that she needs.
With the strength, she will still have the same election. If she calls a leadership election and wins it, she goes to Brussels much stronger as a leader. If she loses it, it's not her problem anymore. And
yet, what would happen in a leader? I mean, this is fascinating. It's like we're looking at the world through filthy windows. Every time you sort of wipe a bit clean and get a bit of a glimpse through it, a seagull comes along. And 29 minutes after 10 is the time. Alan, thank you very much for your window wiping services. I shall look forward to your second call to the programme. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, the phones are full, so obviously you've understood whatever question it is I managed to ask in this sort of bout of verbal diarrhoea that I've inflicted upon. There's one phone line free, the one that your man's just vacated, so grab that one quick. Do you know what I'm going to say? All right, don't tell anyone I told you this. I've got to do 1,500 words on the state of British politics after the party conferences. I'm supposed to have filed it already. I'm quite late. Will you ring me and just say really clever stuff about the state of British politics, and then I'll nick it and get my piece filed in time to pick the kids up from school later? What? What do you mean unprofessional? So it's over to you, Ewan, in the Isle of Wight. The pressure is on. What do you think is going on? What are your political insights at this point in time?
Well, thanks for taking my call. I think Theresa May is going to stay on as Prime Minister. She's nothing has changed. Before she made her nightmare speech, everyone knew she was a weak leader. Having a cough doesn't change anything.
No, you're right.
No one wanted to take her place.
She's been further weakened by Boris Johnson, though. I don't think you can gloss over that. There's a deliberate and successful attempt to undermine her authority still further.
Yeah, but he's still not rushing to take her place, and nor it appears as anyone else.
Why not? Why not? Politics is full of people who are united in their ambition, if nothing else. Some of the biggest egos and the most astonishing vanity projects populating Parliament at the moment, and yet nobody in the ruling party, with an incredibly weak leader, seems prepared to administer the death blow. Why do you think that is?
I think part of it is Brexit. I think also part of it is there's been a massive threshold shift in British politics, led by Jeremy Corbyn. You could see in her speech that she was adopting watered-down versions of Labour policies, which basically admitted the failure of neoliberalism and the free market economy. By wanting to put regulations on the energy companies, then that's admitting a failure of the free market economy. No one has any idea.
I don't think she'd necessarily agree with you on that, but I can see why your analysis works. So Corbyn tax, not to the left necessarily, but towards a more interventionist economy, and you think should follow him in that direction rather than pulling further to the right, which is how things appeared to be going at last year's conference.
I don't think she should necessarily sort of follow him, but I do think the Tories really need to do what Labour have done and return to their roots. They were founded in part by Robert Peel, the man who transformed the Metropolitan Police Service to bring justice for everyone, and he moved into politics to bring social justice for everyone.
Yes, well, social justice, of course, being turned into an insult by people on the right, so it's a perfect phrase to employ, isn't it? That's SJW, isn't it? Social justice warriors probably would have applied to Robert Peel back in the day, and that's a beautiful illustration of your point about how things have shifted. But who's going to lead the Conservative Party back to those values when the names that are thrown most readily forward when we're looking at successors are you know, a million miles away from that brand of one nation conservatism?
I don't know of anyone that could, you know, and that's why no one's rushing to take her place.
So how long's she got?
Well, I'd be surprised if she's still there at the next election. But
whenever that is. It's amazing, isn't it? I can't remember a period of uncertainty as profound as this, where nobody really has got a clue about anything. The only thing anybody's going to agree on, and this is perhaps why he is doing so much better than many predicted, is that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't appear to turn on a sixpence and change his position every 10 minutes in the way that Theresa May does. And that's remarkable when you think about how they were portrayed 2 months out from the last general election. One was a joke and one was strong and stable. And now I possibly argue those two descriptions have been completely reversed.
Completely, yes.
Boy, Ewan, thank you. 10:46 is the time. Seems almost impossible to believe that David Cameron called a referendum on European Union membership in large part to heal the divisions within the Conservative Party. How did that work out for you, Dave? So talk to me about those divisions. We can do bigger picture stuff. I guess it's almost impossible to examine Theresa May's plight without taking Jeremy Corbyn's position into account, but I am much more interested in what you think is going on in the Conservative Party, not in terms of what we can see, which is an almighty mess, but in terms of what we can't see, because it's as if there's a sort of something on the tip of our collective tongues to explain it. She's too weak to lead. She's too weak to leave. She's being held hostage by her own weakness. These all seem to speak to a fundamental truth without fully articulating it, which is hopefully where you come in. The number you need, there's one phone line free at the moment, 0345 6060 973. Can I tell you what worries me, very briefly? What worries me is, the kids. Oddly, when I was very young, I quite fancied politics as a career, not for necessarily the obvious reasons, but because it just seemed to be a world populated by impressive people. I would look at politics. My dad introduced me to Dennis Healey once when we were at the theatre in Stratford, and I was slightly awestruck. Can you imagine being awestruck by Philip Hammond? If your dad introduced you to Philip Hammond as a kid? And there would be people on the other side of the house who deserve those descriptions as well. I don't know if this is age. Like, if I was 45 back then and I'd met Dennis Healey, I'd have been as underwhelmed as I would be by meeting Philip Fiscal Hammond now. But it just seemed to me that politics was okay, yeah, I'm going to be a little bit dewy-eyed. It seemed to me that politics was populated by some titans. So if you're a young person now and you're drawn to politics, you're attracted to a kind of festival of mediocrity. A festival of mediocrity and vanity. These sort of preening inadequates who consider themselves to be enormously important individuals when in fact they've ended up in politics because they couldn't make it elsewhere in many cases. In George Osborne's case, it was journalism. I'm not quite nailing that down, but do you see what I mean? I mean, who is going to look at the current state of British politics and think, yes, I want to be like them? Answer, well, nobody that you'd want to be in politics. Who's going to look at Grant Shapps today, or Theresa May, and think, I want to be like them? Maybe that's another area where Jeremy Corbyn gathers support. I don't know. 10:53 is the time. Sarah is in Wandsworth. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there. You said that you hadn't had many women calling in.
Well, I've had plenty now, but you're more than welcome.
I just wanted to say that I think maybe age has got something to do with it. I'm older than you are.
Yes.
And I think that it just seems these days that it's entertainment, really, more than anything particularly serious. So when I was a child, just as you said, politicians were serious authority figures, really, who you were in the shadows, sort of running things, and they were quite awesome, really. But these days, it's just entertainment. And I mean, I buy into it the same. I look at Newsnight and This Week and all those programs. and the journalists are celebrities, and it's just entertainment. And I think it's very hard to take politics seriously when it does seem like entertainment.
And for me, the proof of that would be, and I don't know when this started, and again, we've always got this notion that everything that's happening in your era, in your generation, is new, and usually none of it is. But it does seem to me, with regard to some of the programmes you mentioned, I'd add Question Time to the list, that at some point in the last 10 years, 15 years, the entertainment value trumped the journalism. It became acceptable to book someone to appear on these programmes who would tell demonstrable lies that got cheered by the audience, and because they were cheered by the audience, he got invited back next week. Demonstrable lies, as opposed to, and I don't watch it often enough to mete out criticism to any presenters or hosts, but it's always struck me as very easy to unveil these people for liars, and I don't understand why many other people in this business don't, unless, like you suggest, they've unwittingly ended up in the entertainment industry rather than journalism.
Yes, I think so. And I was just thinking that, I mean, it's easy for me to say, obviously, because I don't have a mortgage and things like that.
Yes.
But, I mean, life tends to tick over for most of us. I live in London. I'm retired now. I mean, but, you know, I've got grandchildren and things, and children, obviously. And life ticks over. I mean, they struggle. There's been, you know, austerity and all of that. But life still seems to plough on. And it just seems to me that unless there's something very serious, and actually Brexit in a way has been serious, then again, politics is just seen as just, well, it's in the background. Let's go for the entertainment value. You know, who's on, you know, Prime Minister's Question Time, having a go at the other one, who sort of, you know, outspoke. But unless your life, unless something really serious is going on in the country, and tragic and all the rest of it.
And of course it is at the moment, but half the country is pretending that it isn't, which in many ways proves your point perfectly, doesn't it?
Yes, and I was thinking after the war, because I was born after the war, just after the war. But I mean, everybody knew then that the country had been through horrendous times, and you know, there was no housing, and there were bombed building sites and things, and so that there was a sense of something very serious needed to be put right and done. And
that's beautifully put.
And I know that these days, this is going to make a lot of young people hate me.
Go on.
But I mean, these days, you know, most young people have iPhones, they've got music, whatever's going, they go on foreign holidays, they buy clothes as if they're disposable clothes. They spend a fortune on going out on a, you know, Saturday night. You know, in a way, I could only afford a half pint of cider if I was lucky. And so I'm not. I think that's great. I'm not. I'm going
to pick you up slightly on this, because I've been schooled by the so-called millennial generation myself after making similar observations. And if they thought that there was any realistic chance of marrying their income to their outgoings and ending up where you are, mortgage-free, at this stage in your life, they would not be spending their money on all the things you described. They'd be spending their money on the things you spent it on. But the distance between where they are and where you've ended up is so unimaginably huge for them when they are on 30 grand a year and living in an area where the average house is 600.
Oh, no.
They just don't see the point in doing it, and I know you're far too nice to have been indulging in lazy generalisations, but that is part of their problem that is not being addressed by politicians, which brings us back to your central point. I'm going to phrase my final question quite oddly, and I hope you won't take offence.
Not at all.
Well, you don't know that, Sarah.
Oh, I don't know. I'm brave.
Graceful. Yes, you clearly are. Can I ask what age you were when it suddenly seemed as if politicians weren't grown-ups anymore?
I think probably when I was about 50.
Right.
It seemed to change, I think, around then. And then it's kind of gradual. And then, of course, social media and Twitter and all the rest of it's come in over the past 5 years or so, and so it's completely just, you know, burgeoned, really. But about 50, I guess.
OK, that's interesting to know. It'd be about 40 for me, although we're clearly different generations. Possibly a little bit younger. And Twitter's done great good as well. I mean, you know, this engagement, certainly the people on there, again, more from the Jeremy Corbyn school of politics, perhaps, than from the Theresa May school of politics, have seen it as an astonishing marshalling force. What a lovely call. Please call me again, Sarah. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. I'm cracking on with this because it's a strange day. with all the fundraising that we are proud to do. I just find it fascinating, and isn't it nice to do this in a way that is uncombative? I suppose I have to throw open the floor to somebody who disagrees that this is an absolute mess. This is all going swimmingly. Someone other than Michael Gove. Give me a call now. Asking me, I've tweeted it again, it really is one of the most astonishing pieces of journalism that I can remember seeing in a very long time. A journalist called Joe Bernstein at BuzzFeed has essentially unpicked the really ugly inner workings of that website Breitbart, described by its founder Steve Bannon as a platform for the alt-right. The headline under which he's written it is how the Breitbart machine laundered racist hate, and the evidence trail, the documents they've received, the emails, even the detail of the passwords used by some of the key players. One of them had the password Kristallnacht, which is seen by many, of course, as the point at which Hitler's Nazis assumed the whip hand in pre-war Germany. Absolutely breathtaking stuff, and confirms really even the most slightly mad-sounding fears of people like me when you looked at what was masquerading as journalism in these sort of quarters. I'll give you that headline again: how the Breitbart machine laundered racist hate. You remember, of course, that Nigel Farage thanked both Breitbart and Steve Bannon, its former head, after the Brexit vote, said they played a huge part, I think, in delivering it. Well done. Prakash is in Camberwell. Prakash, back to the Tories. What's going on?
Indeed, yes. Well, I mean, whilst I think it's a given that Theresa May is finished, and I think her time is limited. But
how limited is it? I mean, this is, in many ways, that is the observation that everybody makes. And yet, hang on, I haven't finished waffling yet. And yet, the difficulty in pinning down when the clock stops ticking sort of highlights just how confusing everything is, because it feels like she's finished, but no one knows where the finish line is.
Look, if the Tories were able to, they would have got rid of her on June the 10th. But they couldn't get rid of her. Why? Because they had no plan B. And they're still looking for a plan B. Is it Boris? Is it Jacob Rees-Mogg? What is their philosophical position? How are they going to sell austerity? There's so many questions for them to address, and I think they just don't know what they're going to do next. I think that's basically the problem.
Step into my DeLorean sports car while I activate the flux capacitor, and we're going to go back to the small hours of June 2015, when David Cameron had just defeated Ed Miliband and lost the need to govern in coalition. He'd against many expectations, he'd enhanced his position. He'd strengthened the Conservatives. He described it himself as a more enjoyable victory than any he'd witnessed as a Conservative, including all of Margaret Thatcher's. And everything was looking brilliant. He'd called for an EU referendum which would heal the divisions in the party that had beset it for generations. And that's when you left, okay? And now you're back, and you need to explain to yourself what's happened.
What's happened since?
Yeah.
I think, well...
Has he gone? I think that was accidental, to be fair. Although if it was just a sort of... Oh, God, blimey. Oh, no, you're still there. Go on, Prakash.
Yeah, I'm still here.
I thought I scared you off.
Yeah. Well, look, he won the election. He was buoyant, but he made one fatal mistake. He wasn't actually that confident, because he made it conditional on the referendum. And by virtue of having the referendum, he's created all these problems. But actually, there's another problem at the heart of it. It's austerity, because austerity itself is not working. You know, they've managed to persuade us that austerity is the solution to our economic problems, and it's falling apart at the seams. And so when we look at Grenfell Tower, that is a symbol of their failure, and their failure of ideology and thinking and philosophy and all the rest of it. And I don't think they know what to do next.
And yet still they cling to power. It's just sort of looking back on that desperate attempt by David Cameron to woo back the elderly racist vote from UKIP, which succeeded in a sense because it delivered the election result. But for the good of the country, he'd have been better off to actually lose to Ed Miliband, odd though that sounds. And I wonder if we're looking at a similar scenario now, where for the good of the country, I just can't quite see Corbyn in the same breath as Miliband, though, in the same way as Miliband. Corbyn is too much unknown for it to constitute a kind of national improvement. Prakash, thank you. Brandon, Birmingham, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
First of all, I'd like to say that I am 100% in agreement with pretty much everything you've said till now.
Crikey, go on.
It's based on logic. It's based on facts. And I'm wondering, why aren't there more people in the UK that are thinking like that?
Oh, easy peasy. Easy. Go to the fun fair, count the queue at the ghost train, and then go and count the queue at the speak your weight machine.
What I'd like to say is I believe that, for quite some time, even until now, there is a group of people behind the scenes that are pulling all the strings. We've called Theresa May a Maybot, etc. She is exactly that.
I would have agreed with you once, but I don't know that anybody's got their hands on these strings at the moment. I really don't.
Well, I think that's the reason why Boris is still there. Because these people want to have the prestige and the privilege of the power, but they don't want the pressure to come with the office.
Which people? Who are you talking about?
Okay, I'm thinking of a group of people that have a lot of wealth and a lot of influence, and these are the ones who for years have been wanting to have England, the UK out of the EU so they can have more control.
Well, so they can get rid of regulations, get rid of workers' rights, pay less tax, and also insulate themselves from banking reforms that are likely to come in across the European Union in the next couple of years. Something that's actually relevant, arguably, to the Catalonian situation as well. But of course, most of the British media isn't going to dig into the Catalonian situation. They're just going to use it to tell lies about the European Union. But you mean sort of big vested interests? I mean, somebody who's front and centre, like what's the fella who with the Belize connection? He's a mate of Ian Dale's, Lord Ashcroft. He's front and centre about spending huge amounts of money in order to punt his let's get out of the European Union. And I'm sure he's got lots of principled reasons for doing it, but you think that these grey men in the background, these very, very wealthy men in the background, have steered the whole Brexit charabanc because they think it will make them even richer to be out than in.
They can control the wealth. They can control, they can continue building their wealth and getting the properties without the influence of the EU, without the interaction, without having to answer to anyone else, really.
So what happens next?
I think a day will come and Theresa May will resign because they have decided that...
When? Oh, no, you can't do that. You can't answer every question by saying, it will be whatever the Lords of Misrule decide, James. Whatever the lizard people tell her to do is what she will end up doing. When is she going to resign, Brandon?
2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks. It's gone from the ridiculous to the sublime.
I've got time.
What time? 2 to 3 weeks from now.
2 to 3 weeks, I'm thinking Boris Johnson or one of the person will be in that position.
Just can't see it.
You can't, pardon? You can't see it.
I can't see it because I don't think the party will have him, actually. I think he's burnt too many bridges. Never say never with him because, as his marital record reminds us, he gets forgiven for the most astonishing of transgressions repeatedly by the people closest to him. So, why would the people miles away from him be the ones to hold him to account? I just personally can't see it happening. But I could be wrong. 2 to 3 weeks though gives us plenty of time to get back to you when the clock has ticked. We'll give it 3 weeks today. We'll phone Brandon back, see what's going on. Adam's in Brighton. I've got 2 phone lines free if you're quick. We'll take this up till 12. Then we're doing a special Make Some Noise Mystery Hour. 0345 6060 973. I don't want to insult anybody, but this 1,500-word article I've got to write after the programme, you've given me very little to put in it so far. I've got that thing from Wayne in Basildon from yesterday about, what was it, Tony Benn said there are 2 types of politicians, weather vanes and something else. I think that might be my intro. But, I've got 1,490 words to go. Come on, people. I can't do all the hard work. Adam's in Brighton. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for having me on, James.
Very welcome.
I'm going to start by saying something that's going to send a shiver down my spine, saying I agree with Michael Gove. This morning he was asked, when will Theresa May go? And he said, when she wants to.
Yes.
And I think that is going to be the case. I think she will limp and limp and limp until Brexit, and then she'll go.
What do you think's motivating her, given that she hasn't yet explained why she has, if indeed she has changed her mind about Brexit being very bad for Britain, both economically and socially? So what is driving her now, do you think? And I'd like you to be generous if you can.
To be honest with you, I think if it was just up to her, I think she'd be going. I think it's the opposite of what we're hearing about men in grey suits about telling them to leave. I think there's more likely people telling her, you've got to stay.
But she can tell them to get lost. I mean, there's no...
Oh, no, of course. But it's the Tories are fighting so many battles in terms of obviously the elephant in the room of Brexit, but in terms of how they're totally irrelevant to younger people at the moment.
Yes.
But why would Boris Johnson or any of the other Brexiteers actually want to take up this leadership challenge with 18 months of Brexit to go? Now, they can pay lip service about how amazing this is all going to be and how great, but there is still that realisation that something's going to hit the fan at the end of it.
I think most people think like that. I don't think Boris Johnson does. I think Boris Johnson wants to get through the door of 10 Downing Street, and he wouldn't care whether or not he was at the head of a country that was a smouldering wreckage as a result of some of his previous political interventions. As long as he had his hand on the tiller, as long as he gets through the door of Downing Street, he doesn't care what damage gets done to the country in the meantime, which makes him the worst imaginable Prime Minister, but perhaps the most likely successor to Theresa May.
That's very true, and I think if it was down to ego and stuff, which a lot of it is, then he would do. But
not with her. That's what seems so interesting about her. She must be a little more scheming and a little more Machiavellian than she initially appears, but she's not on the same page as Boris Johnson. So, again, when her husband says to her, as I think Dennis Thatcher said on occasion to Margaret Thatcher before the axe finally fell, darling, maybe it's time to call it a day, or if Cherie intervened when Gordon Brown was banging at the door of number 10, or actually number 11, wasn't it, in the real world, but banging on the door of power and saying, it's my turn now, Tony, it's my turn now, and Cherie possibly whispered in Tony's ear, do you think now might be the time? So when Philip Hammond whispers in Theresa's ear, why, darling, what does she say back? What do Philip May, I beg your pardon, whispers in Theresa's ear? If Philip Hammond's whispering, why, darling, in Theresa's ear, we've got a whole world of different stories to report next week. What does she say back? Why, darling, why? And Theresa May says...
I think she has got a burning desire within her. I think,
burning desire to do what?
Well, I think to try and put something right. I think to make some kind of effort into righting the wrongs. I mean, I don't know how far we go down the line. It turns into a Mr. Bean episode.
Oh, well, this is the problem, because I like you, and I like your analysis, and you're being generous, but as soon as I ask you to put flesh upon the bones of your predictions, you're falling apart like a cheap suit.
I can't. I just can't. I can't. That's the thing. But that is why this whole thing is so fascinating.
It is fascinating, isn't it? I don't want to talk about anything else, and we probably should. I better find some new topics by Monday, but for now, I'm going to add that to my list, actually, Adam, thanks to you. So the next couple of callers, I want to have a crack at the why, darling, why? Why, darling? Why? Why? You've been Prime Minister, it's on the CV, it's all gone wrong. These people don't deserve you, they don't respect you, they don't value you, they're laughing at you or abusing you, they're plotting against you. You don't even think Brexit is a good idea. Why? Why, darling, why? 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to play the role of Philip May, whispering into the Prime Minister's ear. It's 11:17. Theresa May is married to a multi-millionaire hedge fund manager. She could walk away at any time to a life of lazy luxury, says Incorrigible FCA, who often strikes me as a man dreaming of a life of lazy luxury, as on occasion am I. He goes on, the fact that she is clinging on by her frazzled fingernails to the vestiges of power says much about who she really is. I don't agree with you on this one. I don't know, I lean towards a more charitable analysis of why she's clinging on by her frazzled fingernails. Everything else you say is true, but it can't be ego, because her ego can't possibly be nourished by what is going on. It's not like the Boris Johnsonian desperate thirst for power at any cost, so much so that he even thinks Churchill's decision to stand up to Hitler was sort of careerist opportunism. We discussed that last week. Still can't quite get past that. It's an astonishing insight into what passes for the man's character. But Theresa May isn't in it for ego, I don't think. She's not in it for vanity. Why now? Maybe the push for power was driven by that, but now, when it would be... I don't think anybody, if she walked away now on a one-on-one level, would think less of her. In fact, I suspect that almost every single person listening to this programme would feel some sense of relief if she went, unless you're completely tied up in the Conservative Party machine and you can see that she has to stay because all of the alternatives are worse. And if that's the only reason for her to stay, because all of the alternatives are worse, and her staying is awful, what the hell have we done to our country? 0345 6060 973. Why is that person Prime Minister? Oh, because all the other alternatives are worse. But it's a disaster. She's a walking disaster. Everything is going wrong. And she's in charge of the most important negotiation that this country has undertaken since Treaty of Versailles, I mean, since the Second World War. I mean, you pick your epoch. The single most important chapter in British history for the best part of 100 years, and we are being led into it by a zombie. And the reason why we're being led into it by a zombie is because the zombie's the best we've got. Holy camole! What is going on? 0345 6060 973. I don't know if anyone's playing my game yet. If you don't play my game, I will sing Why, Theresa to the tune of Delilah by Tom Jones. When Philip May whispers in his inamorata's ear in the small hours of the morning, why, darling, why don't we just jack it all in and go and live in... oh, you can't live in there anymore because of freedom of movement being removed. Go and live in Barbados. Why, darling? And what does she reply? I'd love you to tell me what you think she replied. Why don't we just go? Why don't we stop now? 0345 6060 973. Ian's in Leeds. Ian, what would you like to say?
Yeah. I think the problem I've got now is that I'm thinking about other things other than what I was originally planning to say.
That's the problem with my interminable wafflings. I do apologise.
Yeah, but here, I think the problem is that, you know, it's an old cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, people get the politicians they deserve to a large extent.
Yes.
Because if I had my way, I would make politics, economics and law mandatory subjects.
Yes.
If I had my way. Because I think they are almost as important as reading, writing and arithmetic. Because politics, economics and law basically outlaw what you might call the system, how the system works. And I think if you've got at least a basic understanding, it's not about making people want to be lawyers, want to be politicians, want to be economists or anything, but it's about giving kids, when they leave school, a basic understanding about how what you might call
well, it occurs to me that actually there are probably more people studying politics, economics and law now than ever before, and that our political disaster zone didn't look this dismal back when nobody was. I mean, when I was at sixth form, an economics A-level was considered a bit silly. I did a politics A-level, and law was something you didn't study until you got to university, whereas now they're all relatively popular A-levels. Are you sure that's going to be it? It might be something subtler than that.
I don't think... well, I'm not saying it's a complete panacea, but I would say it should be done at school level, not when it gets to A-level or university. I think, you know... No, I know, I get that, but I'm just pointing out that we didn't study them 50 years ago, and we didn't seem to end up in a mess as big as this when we didn't study them. Yeah. Well, maybe 50 years ago, people were closer to their politicians. Yes, all the politicians were closer to them. Yeah, well, whichever way you want to put it that way. In the same way that people were closer to their bank managers. There might be something in that. You did feel more of a connection. I wonder... This is my pet subject, Ian. What about morality actually being the thing that we've surrendered? If you look... I've just written down 3 names. Liam Fox, who can be routinely and rightly described as the disgraced former defence minister, but he's not. He's the Secretary of State for International Trade. Grant Shapps, who... I mean, where do you even start with him and his multiple identities and his forcible denials and his Michael Green's? But you could call him former Conservative Party chairman and now self-styled leader of an attempted coup. So, you know, no sense there that being found out has diminished his self-regard. And finally on this list, a man who almost epitomises amorality while claiming to represent the party of family values, Boris Johnson. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that and I think back to David Mellor desperately clinging on when scandal after scandal after scandal washed over him, and he refused to do the gentlemanly thing, do the honourable thing. The Conservatives used to do honourable. They used to do it rather well. You know, Carrington was out of his office in moments after the Falklands were invaded. That's what's perhaps missing, is we don't expect moral strength from our politicians anymore. And once you stop expecting moral strength from them, well, what else can you ask them to do? I guess it's how much you want power and how much you're prepared to cling under power. There's a long-forgotten movie called what's it called again? Yeah, the Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. Yes. And there's an interesting scene where he's having a conversation with his former dueling partner, who says, you know, in the next war, meaning the Second World War, our opponents are not going to be they're not going to be gentlemen. They are going to fight using basically dirty tactics. And he was basically meaning the Nazis. Now, I'm not making any direct comparison, but when you have people who want to be in power, and the people who want to keep them in power, they will overlook these things.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? Perhaps that's it, and that is why Corbyn, for all his faults, strikes people as being somebody with a moral compass. They might not like the way it points, but he's got one, and Theresa May appears to change her moral position, despite trumpeting the vicar's daughter rubbish. She shifts her moral position on a sixpence. So what happens next? Give me a prediction. Crystal ball's out, please, Ian.
What happens next? I think she'll limp on into the new year. But then I think there will be something happening.
What's going to happen? Because, I mean, the positives you got with the economy will pick up. It just won't. Brexit will get easier. It just won't. What's going to happen that changes the picture between now and March 2019? This is an appalling limbo that we've embarked upon.
Okay, you want me to make a prediction on her prediction? I think someone will challenge her, but not necessarily who you might think.
Oh, I like that. That'll do.
I think it'll be a so-called stalking horse.
Or it'll be someone who does a kind of... Because I don't know how many of us had heard of David Cameron prior to him coming from the back of the pack to beat David Davis to the glittering prize. It's 29 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I am asking you to lie in bed with the Prime Minister and whisper into her ear. You're playing the part of Philip May. I should make that absolutely clear. You whisper into her ear, why don't we just call it a day, Theresa? Why don't we just call it a day? What do you think her reply is? We haven't done this yet. I should probably have a crack at it myself. Because I think of a marriage. That's what I think of. You know, who do you turn to first for counsel and advice, for support and strength? You turn to your husband or your wife if you're lucky enough to have a good marriage. And they clearly do have an incredibly strong marriage. It's one of the few pluses, one of the few moments of beauty during that entire conference speech was when he bounded onto the stage at the end to hug his wife. It was lovely to see. So when he says, why don't we call it a day, what does she say? 0345 6060 973. She almost certainly doesn't say that. 0345 6060 973. That would just be weird. So what do you think she does say? That's the number you need to ring to tell me. It's 11:30. Before that, we've got 10 minutes or so to examine what we think drives Theresa May. Why is she holding on? The party don't really want her there. The country doesn't really want her there. She doesn't really want to be there. Why is she still there? In her own mind, what's the reason? Marie's in Bayswater. Marie, what do you think? Why, Theresa, why?
Well, I think using your analogy of her lying in bed with Philip, and he says, why, darling, why? And I think she says, duty, darling, duty. I will just lie back and think of England.
I think you've gone a bit far now. There was no need for you. I think everybody was playing a similar game until you went in and ruined it with your filthy mind. But yes, I understand.
I'm sorry. I do. I think she's accepted that she's the scapegoat for the potential disaster, in my view, probable disaster that Brexit is going to lead us into. And I think she is a person of duty. And although I don't agree with hardly anything she says or stands for, or the party stands for, I admire, admire the fact that she is a woman of duty. And she is just taking the knocks and she's carrying on. And the only reason I can possibly come up with is that she is just a very dutiful woman.
Because however bad it gets, darling, it will be worse if I'm not here. That's what she genuinely believes. And she might well be right.
Yeah. Or there's no alternative. So I have to be here. So in terms of how long I'm going to do this for, I'm going to do it for as long as I can. As long as they want me to, as long as I'm carrying this scapegoat, and it might be that she just can't do it anymore. It might be in 6 months' time the weight and the burden of it will just be too much and she just can't do it. But I think she's going to, in her mind, it's a matter of duty and she will carry on as long as she can.
Duty. For good or for ill, it's a charitable analysis of why she's doing what she's doing, because a lesser dutiful, a less dutiful person would waltz off into the sunset. She must. What do you think? I mean, when's the last time you were waking up every morning with that feeling in the pit of your stomach that you know what I mean? When you're, I don't know, in the middle of your A-levels, or you've just been dumped, or you've just lost your job, or everything's awful, your boss is just a monstrous psychopath. Do you know what I mean? She must wake up every morning feeling, oh my God, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure.
And that's where natural sympathy comes from. Everyone giving me a kicking yesterday just for expressing a little bit of natural sympathy. That's all it is. Although quite a few of you still administering the kicking today. I like that. Dutiful. Thomas is in Bristol. Why? Why doesn't she just call it a day?
Well, it's a tough one, isn't it, when you start looking at these things? But when you've got a blithering racist and Walter from the Beano nipping at your heels, you know, it doesn't have to be in politics. You could just be in a normal job. You know, you've got to start questioning, you know, am I doing the best thing, really? A previous caller of yours said, you know, call them out. I completely agree with it. You know, the reality is that if it wasn't so serious, it's utterly hilarious.
Yes, that's beautifully put.
She needs to do something about this. And I think calling leadership election and actually just proving to the fact that there's just nobody else that can really do anything better than what she's doing. I mean, I can't think of a single credible politician, and by the way, I don't think Theresa May is that credible, but I don't think there's anybody that wants to do this job right now. And
anybody credible?
Yeah, exactly.
But Boris, remember, in the party membership, average age 72, Boris Johnson comes in top. He comes in with over 20% of the vote of sitting parliamentarians. Ruth Davidson's not included in that polling. So he'd get over the wire in the country. Whether or not he could get the parliamentary party behind him is an altogether different question. But that would be a reason for her to stay. It would be, why don't we call it a day, darling? Because if we do, Boris Johnson might end up in charge. And look at the damage he's already done. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah, but instead of it being Philip, it would be the Conservative Party being a darling. You know, who do you really want? Do you want Boris running this because, you know, he's completely bonkers, or, you know, do you want to continue allowing me to have a crack at this? I don't think they're in a good position. I don't think they really know what they stand for anymore. Austerity has created, you know, effectively what the Brexit vote was. You know, there was no real appreciation that this could come out and end up with Brexit being the vote. And it's created this position.
And all of the people who lied through that, actually that's unfair. All of the people who were profoundly wrong about everything in the run-up to the vote are pretending that they weren't. Someone's just sent me an amazing clip of Digby Jones, the sort of provincial solicitor who somehow ended up at the head of the CBI and then in the House of Lords, railing against elites the other day from the House of Lords, where he's claimed, I forget what the precise sum is without making any speeches. There's a clip here someone's just sent me of him explaining how the German car industry would never allow Brussels to do exactly what Brussels is currently doing. And he's never going to put his hands up and say, none of them are. That's the bit I'm finding psychologically hard to process at the moment. If someone catches me with my hand in the cookie jar, how can they possibly say that my hand isn't in the cookie jar?
They've got themselves rock and a hard place of being either undemocratic or doing an impossible job. That's it. You know, that basically is where they're at now, and there's no silver bullet for any one of them. You know, everything within politics at the moment is based on sensationalism. That's why someone like Boris and Jacobs Rees-Mogg could be in the running. You know, you would never have thought of that. You know, they are so... You know,
well, it's so out there. It's so nuts, and I suppose that basic subversion of truth is something that I don't know where it stops. Mate, do you want to do a quick prediction, Thomas?
Yeah, leadership election by the end of the year, and reality prevails. The duty piece that your previous caller was mentioning probably rings true. And, you know, nothing else really gets resolved by the fact that, you know, she's chastised, rightfully so, of not doing a great job, but there's no one else to do it.
And so with 15 months to go until the end of our membership of the European Union, we might have a new head of negotiating at the beginning of next year.
maybe, or another sort of vote of confidence required again.
11:56. Have a great weekend, Thomas. And just a little brief message to the astonishing number of people who listen to this programme and don't like what they hear on a regular basis. What are you hearing now? I mean, just every single thing has fallen apart. Every single thing. You know, oh, they need us more than we need them. That's not true. So if that's why you told me you voted the way you voted, well, what's left? We can't control our borders. That's not true or particularly relevant. That's gone. That ship has sailed. She didn't mention immigration. The leader of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, didn't mention immigration in her speech because the sort of rhetorical value of it has completely disappeared. The economic situation, the claim that it wouldn't affect us. I think Andrea Leadsom said that the pound wouldn't be affected. All of these people, Digby Jones, I've just been sent something from a YouTube channel that was set up to boost Brexit, and it's Digby Jones eviscerating a Remain Labour MP, completely owning her by ridiculing the idea that German car makers would allow Brussels to do a deal against their interests. The German industry yesterday instructed its members to prepare for a disastrous hard Brexit, warned them, get ready, you're going to take a massive kicking if these people in Britain don't get their finger out soon. Every single element of it is falling apart, and yet I know that no needles are moving. It's the strangest experience. It is exactly how that little lad must have felt at the back of the crowd looking at the Emperor's bare backside while all the grown-ups around him were going, what a splendid pair of doublets. What a wonderful outfit the new Emperor is wearing. And there's a little kid at the back of the clothes going, I can see his willy, Mum. He's naked. He's completely naked, Mum. No, that's a wonderful ermine robe that he's wearing, and my goodness, what a lovely diadem he's got atop his shining pate. Go, Mum, honestly, he's got no clothes on. You know, the British Parliament was always sovereign. European Union rules allow us to control our borders, if that really is something you consider to be important. The situation in Spain has shown that the European Union has no interest or power to intervene in the sovereign policing, internal policing of member states. The German car industry is not going to insist that Angela Merkel somehow gives us a good deal. America has already objected to the terms of the trade deal that we're trying to strike up with the European Union when we've left America. Remember Donald Trump front of the queue, all of that? It's all true now. It's not even Project Fear becoming true. It's already Project Fact, and yet still the needle won't nudge. And it's really hard to understand why, although part of the problem is obviously the frosty reception that you feel is being prepared on the other side of the fence, the I told you so's, and the bitterness, the resentment about the unnecessary damage that's been done, the appalling plight of 3 million European Union citizens here, 1 million British citizens on the continent who still don't know what their life will be like, what the terms and conditions under which they exist will be just 16, 17, 18 months from now. It could all change. People getting deportation letters, people getting spat at in the street for speaking in foreign languages. It's all happened. It's all happened. And yet the needle won't nudge at all. What is it that you're going to get in return for all this rubbish? Beats me. Absolutely outrageous that these train drivers on Southern have secured a 28% pay rise. Do you know the poor fella that runs the parent company is only on £2.16 million a year, and the entire company only delivered profits in the most recently posted figures of £100 million. How the hell are they going to afford to pay the people that actually drive the trains a sum of money that is about 100th of what the boss gets, or a 50th? Have to check my maths. That's why we won't be talking about that today, because on a morning when the Foreign Secretary is being cited by the Iranian government as the witness, a genuine witness for the continuing prosecution of an innocent British citizen, of course, people would rather you spoke about the audacity of working-class train drivers earning a significant pay rise. We will instead turn our attention to Theresa May, first and foremost, and while I feel sorry for her, I think it might be sexism. Seriously, I've had the privilege over the last few years of having this programme produced by women who are younger than me. I've also had the pleasure for the last nearly 18 years of being married to a woman who, although only a couple of years younger than me, is considerably more open-minded and forward-thinking when it comes to gender relations. It means, as like you, I'm constantly learning about the changing nature of society. The harassment scandal, of course, in Westminster being the most recent example of just how antediluvian and in need of serious reformation so many male attitudes to women are. But I have coined this phrase in recent weeks. I call it a benign chauvinism. I can't help the way I was raised. I can try to change, but I do look at women differently from how I look at men. Possibly wrongly. I'm not sure, actually. This isn't the topic of conversation that we're going to be having today. We may have it at a later date. I love the topics which essentially see you cast in the role of my unpaid therapist. But the point I'm making is I don't know whether the sympathy I feel for Theresa May at the moment is born of the fact that she's a woman, which would make it rather less sincere, I think. Sincere's not the right word. Objective, there you go. It's not an objective sympathy that I feel for her. Am I feeling sorry for a Prime Minister who is caught between a rock and a hard place, or am I feeling sorry for a woman because I was raised to, you know, open doors and possibly not spread my cape over a puddle for a passing monarch, but certainly to treat women with a level of decorum and I'd never get up on a train to offer my seat to a man, but I would offer my seat to a woman. Actually, a very old man I would, but anyway, again, we digress slightly. I want you to tell me whether you feel sorry for Theresa May today, and if so, why? 0345 6060 973. We could also, of course, turn our attention to the question of whether or not she has any choice but to continue on this ludicrous path. What would you do if you were her at the moment? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And how have we ended up in a situation? Do you know, it was in May. I'll find you the front page, actually, because if you saw the guest list for the party last night celebrating Paul Dacre's editorship of the Daily Mail for the last 25 years, you'd understand why I obsess somewhat about the influence that he wields over this country. It is not an exaggeration to say that the man can lie through his teeth on a Monday, say the precise opposite on a Tuesday, and still expect cabinet ministers and prime ministers to turn up at his shindig, as they did last night in their droves. So you just go back to January of this year, and this was actually printed. On the momentous day, Theresa May said Britain will quit the single market. She put Cameron's feeble negotiations to shame with an ultimatum to Brussels. We'll walk away from a bad deal and make EU pay. And then there's a union flag waving in the background of a cartoon image of Theresa May standing on top of a European Union flag, and that itself is on top of the white cliffs of Dover. Steel of the new Iron Lady, says the front page of a newspaper that, within living memory, of course, was printing identically sized headlines saying hurrah for the black shirts, and explaining to its readers why Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Germany should not be made welcome here. Plus ça change. What's the next bit? Plus la même chose? Anyway, I don't know. European language anyway, we'll be banning that soon. So that is a mark of how mad the country has become. In the space of 11 months, this so-called newspaper can shift from cheerleading the new Iron Lady to effectively describing a government in absolute freefall. This is a matter of national... It's more than pride, isn't it? It's almost a matter of national security. It's certainly a matter of citizen security. We have a Foreign Secretary in place now who has actively increased the sentence of an innocent British civilian, a British citizen imprisoned in Iran under the most bogus of circumstances and in the most grim of conditions. Boris Johnson has been cited by Iranian state television. Again, you might not know this yet because you're too busy worrying about changing rooms in Topshop. Boris Johnson has been cited by Iranian state television as providing proof that Nazarene Agori-Ratcliffe was lying when she said that she was in Iran to visit her parents. Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, has been cited in a courtroom or in I beg your pardon, it's already happened in a courtroom, on state television, a hostile state, I think, to most of us here, cited as a witness for the continuing prosecution, the continuing incarceration of this poor woman. And his position is probably safe. He's probably not facing any sort of dismissal or resignation calls that have blighted Priti Patel over the last couple of weeks. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. I don't know what I would do if I was her. I really don't. I've got no idea. But, if I was Theresa May, but I do feel sorry for her. I'm going to try and tell you why. Something's just gone wrong with my buttons in the studio. I just dropped my newspapers on a button I've never pressed before, so I don't know if you can still hear me. Can you still hear me? That's a relief. I don't see what choice she has. I really don't. Brexit, okay, is an undeliverable dream. She knows there's no earthly way we can come out of Brexit better off than we are now. You saw yesterday that in Grimsby, where 90% of the fish processed by the town's biggest employer is imported from the European Union. You saw yesterday Grimsby have sent representatives to central London asking if they can be exempted from Brexit. Grimsby, perceived by many as the heart of the English fishing industry, and fish, of course, is pretty much all that the cheerleaders have got left when they're telling us about what's going to get better. The fishing industry in Grimsby has requested an exemption from whatever trade agreement is put in place after Brexit. They want to promise that they'll be able to carry on exactly as they are as members. Grimsby's vote to leave, I think, was close to 70%. Presumably, none of them knew the simple fact that the businesses that contribute to the fishing industry in this country would face imminent collapse in the event of this deal not being done. You'll remember also, of course, that steel was cited as one of the main things that we would be able to do better. You probably won't know that today the steel industry has warned of looming job losses if, after Brexit, the light touch approach to blocking cheap imports, which the government revealed yesterday, is introduced. So the notion that we'd somehow protect jobs in the steel industry has been surrendered. The steel industry itself is telling us that jobs are going to be under threat. Steel dumping by China will be the result if we fail to match the EU bar on imports. Don't take it from me, this is your actual steel industry. Don't take it from me with regard to fishing fleets in Grimsby, that is your actual fishing industry. They're all begging to be left the same as they are now. So what you have is a Prime Minister who has to acknowledge and absorb this information while pretend that she doesn't know it. Because if she stands up in Parliament or in front of the 1922 committee anytime soon and simply says, oh, by the way, the fishing industry in Grimsby really wants things to stay exactly as they are now, then the answer of why the hell are we leaving becomes even more impossible to answer. You look at Priti Patel, who astonishingly hasn't garnered any support from the usual cheerleaders for Brexit, an indication perhaps that while they remain incredibly blind to their own myriad inadequacies and intellectual failings, they are not blind to hers. But the notion that ideology, by being an ideologue, she somehow had a position in cabinet protected more than she would have done in normal circumstances is a mark of just how mad things have become. Oh, she can't sack her, she's a prominent Brexiter. Well, hang on a minute, she broke the ministerial code. Oh, she can't sack Boris, he's a prominent Brexiter. Well, hang on a minute, he's a witness for the bogus prosecution of a British citizen in foreign courts. Yes, doesn't matter. So that's why I feel sorry for her, because it's an impossible position that she's in. Her entire government has been charged with delivering a lie. And because the entire government is built upon a deceitful pledge, the notion that we can be better off out of the European Union than we are in it, and because she, like the Chancellor, knows that that's not possible and is possessed of a moral integrity, I do believe, that refuses to allow her to, for example, lie to Ian Dale when he asked her how she'd vote in the event of another referendum. Moral integrity is so rare in British politics that she ended up getting castigated for that, when in fact it was a very rare mark of a politician refusing to tell the convenient fib. William Hague struggled not a jot when asked the same question to issue the convenient fib to put party ahead of country. Theresa May won't do that. She won't pretend that she can't see what's going to happen. She sees her job as having to minimise the damage, but she can't tell the public that her job is to minimise the damage, because then the newspaper editor whose party she attended last night would line her up alongside the enemies of the people, independent judiciary, the saboteurs, representative parliamentary democracy, and, well, everybody else he hates, every other thing he hates, like, I don't know, academic freedom and women. She'd be on that list. If she told the truth, she'd be on that list. If she stood up and said, my job is to minimise the damage that's about to be caused by the will of the people. This is British politics in a nutshell. I know that sounds a little arrogant, but hey, deal with it, because there is no other analysis, there is no other interpretation. You tell me what you think Theresa May is doing if it isn't this. She is trying to minimise the damage caused by the will of the people. She is fearful that if she goes and Boris Johnson and Michael Gove's wing of the Conservative Party somehow take over, things will be infinitely worse. Neither Boris Johnson nor Michael Gove wanted to win the referendum. They just wanted to shore up their own position within the party by being associated with a decent but not victorious result. She's terrified of what Jeremy Corbyn represents, rightly or wrongly. I still don't know. I still withhold judgment on that. She's terrified of the prospect of, you know, train drivers getting pay rises that bring them into line with approximately 1/50th of the boss's wage. I mean, that's that way madness lies, according to the Theresa May worldview. And she can't control her own cabinet because it has nothing to do with politics. The performance of the Foreign Secretary has nothing to do with the Foreign Office. The performance of the Secretary of State for International Development has nothing to do with how good she is at promoting international development. The role of the Chancellor has nothing to do with how good he is as a Chancellor. It's all about Brexit. And it's all mad. Absolutely and incontrovertibly insane. But it's also home, which is why you can't stop caring. And it's also, you know, a wonderful, beautiful country. That's why so many people have come here to make their lives. It's why so many of us have managed to do better in life than our parents. And it's all about to change. It's all about to go backwards. And she knows this, which is why I feel sorry for her. I believe, okay, this is going to sound a little bit daft, I believe that Theresa May is the first Prime Minister with a sense of duty to this country since Gordon Brown. I know there's only been one in between. But the notion that David Cameron had a sense of patriotic duty is clearly bunkum. The fella has sold the United Kingdom down the river in the hope of healing a rift in his party that is about to destroy Theresa May. I believe genuinely that Theresa May has a sense of duty that doesn't allow her to leave this job. And that is a mark of sympathy for me. However, if it was a bloke, I don't know, hand on heart, whether or not I'd feel the same. That's actually a side issue, isn't it? I know I started off with that at 10 o'clock, but now that I've explored my thoughts a little more closely, the gender thing and my fears of being a low-level sexist probably aren't the most important element of the story. The most important element of the story is, Theresa May, does she deserve our sympathy? 0345 6060 973. I reject most of her politics, but I put my country ahead of my politics, my country ahead of, if I had a political party, my country has to be more important than my party. Is Theresa May putting her country ahead of her own welfare and her own party, or have I taken temporary, hopefully temporary, leave of my senses? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Start with the question of whether you feel sorry for her, and if you don't, tell me why. CEO of Sainsbury's has also issued a request to see the food industry somehow exempt from whatever arrangements we end up with post-Brexit. That's the fishing industry, the steel industry, and the country's biggest supermarket, or one of the biggest supermarkets. Maybe Tesco's bigger. These are questions for a different day. They all want exemptions from Brexit. Theresa May is left holding the baby, really, and pretending that everything's going to be fine, because if she didn't do that, what would happen? And that's why I feel sorry for her, although it is a position which has managed to unite both friends and foes alike in condemnation so far this morning. Let's get the phone lines open and see whether I really have gone mad. Bob's in the city. Bob, what do you think?
I have sympathy with Theresa May in that she was handed a poison chalice by David Cameron, and she was the one in the best position at the time to deal with the situation. But I lose my sympathy now because it's so clear that we're in such a mess. And
well, it is to you, but it's still not clear to enough of the country for her to stand up and say so. Or, of course, we now move into chicken and egg territory, don't we, where maybe if she did stand up and say so, the rest of the country would, or parts of the country would take notice.
Well, I think she has an opportunity with the impact studies, which...
do they exist this morning, Bob? I haven't checked. David Davis said that they were incredibly detailed and brilliant, but he couldn't show us them last month, and then last week he said they didn't exist at all. I haven't caught up with where we are today.
I suspect that they don't exist. Right. I suspect that they haven't really...
but what's the official line? What's the official... Do they exist today or not?
I think they don't. I think they're writing them rather quickly now.
Right.
In a state that they would be happy for the general public to see.
This
without
is what they mean by redacted.
Too much. Yeah, without causing too much angst and anti-Brexit fever. The other part of this, of course, is Paul Dacre. And I really do despair when I see things such as Theresa May going to Paul Dacre's party. And I am so annoyed that no one can get Paul Dacre on an interview and they say, what on earth are you doing? And the underlying...
If I told you the guest list from last night, modesty, not modesty, I suppose a degree of loyalty to colleagues past and present prevents me from telling you who was there, but the most of the cabinet was there. Most other Fleet Street editors were there, actually, not just the obvious ones that you'd expect. A sort of panoply of plutocrats and the great and the good, all queuing up to pay homage. They all despise him, but they're terrified of what it would do to them to be turned over on the front page of the newspaper. They all despise him. The conversation in the lavatories and places like that is whispered and utterly vitriolic, but he's got no idea, because the only time he ever comes into contact with the real world is on that little 4 feet of pavement he crosses as he gets out of his chauffeur-driven limousine in Kensington to get into the executive lift at Derry Street. So you're never going to get a chance to interview him, Bob.
Yeah, I know. And that's the sad thing. And the sad thing is he has so much influence over, the core of Tory party voters and the middle classes of this country.
I mean, that is why I feel sorry for Theresa May, oddly, because I think she's actually being held hostage by Paul Dacre's psychodrama, by his sociopathic 1950s throwback bigotry.
Yeah.
And she really is. What else can she do?
I don't think she can do very much at all. If she throws a towel in, who can take over? There is no one in that cabinet that is worthy of the...
And she knows this better than anyone.
Yeah, and she can't do anything about Boris, because if we have Boris outside of the tent doing whatever he will while she's inside, that's a terrible situation.
If he can imperil an imprisoned British citizen while Foreign Secretary, just imagine what he could do while Prime Minister.
I mean, that is, I understand why she put David Davis, Boris, and the other chap in place at the time of post-Brexit, Liam Fox. But Boris, he's such a buffoon. Something like this was bound to happen. His mouth is out of control.
Well, my theory was that she put those 3 in charge, and I presume this is what you mean when you say you understand why, was because they have to own it. So if she stood up now and said, look, we're going to have to call it all off, then however many times she goes to his parties and however much homage she pays to him while holding her nose, Dacre's front page would be, she was a Remainer all along, because she made it clear that she wasn't in favour of Brexit. She couldn't even lie to Ian Dale on this radio station when he gave her the chance to lie her way out of trouble. She couldn't do it. She knows that if she's the one that stands up and says, look, this is a disaster, then she gets crucified. It has to be one of them, which is why she put him in the jobs where it would become most obvious most quickly that this is an absolute disaster. It's completely impossible to do all the things that they said they'd be able to do. But we've now reached a point where their lies get unveiled on a daily basis. We just mentioned the 58 impact assessments that were incredibly detailed and finished last month but didn't exist last week. We've mentioned Liam Fox saying it'll be the easiest deal in history, right through to no one ever said it was going to be easy. They've all had their lies literally lit up and nothing's changed. That's why I feel sorry for her.
Nothing's changed, and our press still influence far too many people. You talk to people in Grimsby, they still think that leaving the EU is a great thing. despite the decimation.
Because they don't know. Because they don't know. The Grimsby Evening Telegraph, which I didn't realise is a sister title of one of my late father's old papers, the whole Daily Mail, is going to town on this now. Unbelievable detail about what it's going to mean for Grimsby. They still got an MP who's trying to argue, and this is where you realise just how far down the rabbit hole you've gone. There's an MP in Grimsby who's trying to argue that an exemption from Brexit is precisely the sort of freedom we'll be able to exercise as a result of Brexit. And he got voted back in again. I'm leaving that hanging, Bob. I don't know, why do we keep Bob on for so long? He must have been a contributor of impeccable calibre. I do, however, now have a characteristically full switchboard, so I'll try and rattle through. I've got to stop, haven't I, dominating the conversation quite so much. Some people tune in to listen to the callers, not to me. I know, impossible almost to believe, but I promise, in the next half of this hour, try to get rather more people on air than we have managed to do so in the first half. And the question is, do you feel sorry for Theresa May? Do you feel sorry for her now that you've heard me explain why you should, or are you rapidly arriving at the conclusion that I may have been smoking something a little bit intoxicating before coming on air this morning? It's 10:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mystery Hour on the way at 12. We may have a look at mollycoddling and so-called cotton wool parenting after 11, or we may stay with this. The decision, as ever, is entirely up to you. But the time now is approaching 10:30. The fishing industry in Grimsby is begging government to be exempted from whatever trade arrangements are put in place after Brexit, and they want to carry on doing deals and trading exactly as they do now. Grimsby, of course, voted to leave at a very high level, such as the power of manipulation and dishonesty. The steel industry warns today that there will be job losses if we don't keep EU rules in place after leaving the European Union. If we open up our borders to cheap Chinese steel, then the few jobs left in the British steel industry, they'll have gone. Prominent Brexiters swore blind that both the fishing industry and the steel industry would somehow benefit from leaving the European Union. And today the CEO of Sainsbury's warns that they too would give anything to be exempted from whatever arrangements are put in place, and if no arrangements are put in place, then, well, it could be game over even for an outfit like Sainsbury's. And yet Theresa May has to, and this is the point that some of you who are cross with me seem to be missing. You think she's got a choice. You think she could stand up and say the country is heading for disaster. She can't, because half of the country, or thereabouts, still refuses to see the evidence of their own eyes. Perfectly natural position to be in. Very, very few people are capable of quick changes of mind, especially when there is so much emotion invested. So she knows she can't stand up. She could do it in Parliament, because a massive majority of parliamentarians, what with being so informed and engaged with democracy, they're clear about what's going to happen, but she can't do it to the country. And that's why I feel sorry for her. My theory, such as it is that Theresa May remains in post, suffering the slings and arrows of truly outrageous fortune, precisely because she can't see any other option. She's terrified of a Corbyn government. You might not be, but she is. And she's arguably even more terrified of what would happen if, for example, a foreign secretary who is used as a witness for the prosecution in the bogus imprisonment of a British citizen in Iran were to end up as Prime Minister. And I feel sorry for her, because I think she's right. I don't think there is anybody else who could be making a better job of keeping the lie alive while simultaneously hoping that it's going to slowly deflate to a point where she can actually point it out. Trevor's in Camden. Trevor, what's going on?
Hi, James. I hope you're going to count me as a friend who's united against it.
What a charming start to the call. Carry on.
Well, but I mean, it's only just gone 10:30 and you're clearly out to lunch already.
It's not impossible. Go on.
Look, you can't feel sympathy for Theresa May. She's been complicit in all of the cabinet decisions that have decimated this country since the financial crash and before.
Well, no, I'm feeling sympathy for her exclusively for the current condition in which she finds herself. I'm giving her I'm ripping up the scorecards for her tenure as Home Secretary and focusing solely upon her premiership, all right? To be clear.
On her premiership, then, I would suggest, I'd say, I mean, you said that she could stand up in Parliament, perhaps, and diffuse this situation. And I think she's got one...
No, I said, I'm not going to have to clarify everything. I'm supposed to be taking more calls this half hour. I said she could stand up in Parliament and know that she's got majority support when she says Brexit's a disaster. I don't think she can stand up in front of the country yet and say that.
No, but she's got the chance in Parliament, because apparently these impact assessments are going to be published in 3 weeks' time.
Oh, they exist again, do they now? Or they're about to exist?
Well, they're furiously writing them. Or no, sorry, they're furiously redacting them.
Right, the ones that were finished last month and incredibly detailed. This is according to the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union. They were finished last month and incredibly detailed. They didn't exist last week, but they're going to be ready for publication in 3 weeks, having been redacted.
Well, at least they're consistent.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The thing is, when they are, they're not going to be good, are they? They're not going to be good. They can't possibly...
Well, I hope they are. I mean, genuinely, I hope they are, even though as an avowed addict to facts and evidence rather than the bleatings of a bloke that owns Weatherspoons, I hope they are good, but no, I mean, it's unlikely.
But come on.
If they were good, we'd have seen them already.
You wouldn't have been having these conversations over the last 11 months, if there was any inkling that they were going to be good. They're not going to be good. They're going to be realistic.
I still hope they're good.
But they're going to change. They're going to be realistic and appalling.
So what should she do differently then? Because the root of my sympathy is the belief that she can't tell the country that they were wrong to vote to leave the European Union, largely because of the power wielded by Rupert Murdoch and Paul Dacre, but also because it's true. She can't do it. So what else can she do in the current climate?
Well, I think with the impact assessment to come out, that will give her the one chance to actually, be truthful and honest with the people of the country.
Then you have got sympathy for her. You coming on air trying to be rude to me in a friendly fashion, because she can't do anything until the impact reports come out.
James, did you have any sympathy when Thatcher got booted out?
I can't really remember, but I never like to see a lady with tears in her eyes.
Yeah, I danced. Not because of any personal animosity, but for what she had actually done to the country and what she set in train and what's been continued ever.
Alan Bennett, she wreaked more havoc to the north of this country than anybody since William the Conqueror.
Yes, well, probably right. Or the.
Well, let's leave her out of it, because she's clearly not the new Iron Lady anymore. Whatever Paul Dacre stuck on his front page as recently as January. What could she have done differently up until this point?
Up until this point, I think she should have actually.
See, I've got you. Keep out. O'Brien dismantles Trevor in Camden. Woo, viral.
She needed to have a bit more resolve. I really think, although
give me this bit more resolve nonsense. What could she substantively have done differently?
She could have got rid of Johnson. That would have been a start. That would have actually shored up her position, I think, rather than weaken it. Because I think people are pretty tired of Johnson, and this latest Iranian nonsense just is about like the cherry on the icing on the cake, really. Yeah. It's just appalling, the man. He shouldn't be let anywhere near government. She would have then been in a stronger position to actually show her hand and to be a bit more forthright. But at the minute, you can understand why she appointed the three leading Brexiteers to the positions of, Foreign Secretary.
Because she's desperately hoping that they'll have the decency to own up and say, well, look, we couldn't be any closer to the action. She gave us the big jobs, and it's a bloody disaster. Let's call the whole thing off. But they're never going to do that, because she's presuming that they possess some sort of integrity comparable to hers.
Yeah, I don't think they will. But I don't.
All right, well, I give you that. Presumably, she feels she can't sack Boris Johnson. That would make her position even weaker, and the likelihood of her being replaced by someone like him even higher, and that would be even worse for the country. So, oddly, your explanation of why I shouldn't feel sorry for her has made me feel even sorrier for her. Sav's in Walthamstow. Sav, what would you like to say?
Well, I think before the election, I would have had some sympathy for Theresa May, but after the election, no. I think it's her own fault that she's in this mess.
She was 20-odd points ahead. I mean, there's a very powerful case. I know that she'd swore blind she wasn't going to do it, but hey, this is politics. She was 20-odd points ahead. David Davis was encouraging her and urging her to do it, and it looked like it might perhaps create a scenario in which none of them would ever have to admit what a disaster it was.
Well, I think she thought she could, win the general election like Tony Blair did in 1997 with a majority of 400-odd MPs.
Right, maybe 80 or 90 or 100 majority is what she was hoping to get, and she failed to get it. Why does that make you lose sympathy for her? It could be construed as a reason to feel even sorrier for her. She took the advice of her party, she believed the opinion polls, she went to the country, she got spanked, and now she's even weaker than she was before. Poor thing.
I think she should have waited for a little longer, see how the mood of the country, and
the party and then called for an election. I think it was too early on her part.
But then she probably felt her majority wasn't big enough to railroad Parliament into damaging the country's health for generations to come. That's why I feel sorry for her. She has been ordered by, not so much by the referendum result, which most Brexit campaigners would have considered that margin of victory to be grounds for another referendum if it had gone the other way. They even said so, of course, but now they pretend that they didn't. But she's been ordered by the media interpretation of the referendum result, by the Paul Dacre, crush the saboteurs, enemies of the people, put the assassination by a white supremacist terrorist of Joe Cox right at the back of the paper, don't put it anywhere near the front page, but put on the front page, oh, I don't know, if some refugee looks like he might be older than 18, that's front page news. The murder of an elected representative by a white supremacist terrorist, his conviction, that's page 29. She knows how it works. That attitude has created an environment where it is absolutely impossible for her to tell the truth. And because she can't tell the truth, I feel sorry for her. Alison is in Crawley Down. Alison, what would you like to say?
I have no idea, James, how you can feel sorry for her. I really don't. She sought the leadership at a time when many looked at it and thought, I think I might give that a miss for the moment.
Sense of duty.
She sought it with enthusiasm.
Patriotism.
She achieved it. We had a 48-52 split. We needed the country.
She kept Andrea Leadsom out of number 10 Downing Street.
Well,
hey, you've got to give her credit for that, Alison.
Well, I think Andrea Leadsom might have done that herself.
Innovative jams.
And I just think,
got all their albums.
at a time when she needed to bring us together as a
She couldn't. How could she bring us together when a judge is described as an enemy of the people for doing some judging on the front page of this monster's newspaper?
She needed to show some leadership. She wanted to be the leader. She needed to show some leadership. Instead of which, not only did she not show leadership in saying this was close, we need to listen to each other, we need to talk about compromise solutions, we need to talk about what people are concerned about and what are our priorities. She just went, Brexit means Brexit, we're going to go hard Brexit, don't you worry, I'm strong and stable, and all this rubbish.
At last, a PM not afraid to be honest with you. This is the front page of the Daily Mail from May of this year. Deadly serious, utterly candid and unashamedly moral. The Tories' 84-page manifesto yesterday unveiled Mayism, a word she hates, and British politics entered a new era. So what she did secured that sort of coverage from the fellow whose party she went to last night. What should she have done differently is alienate and infuriate this sociopath and get crucified.
She should have led the country. She should have had the courage to lead the country.
The country had spoken. No. The country had said they want to leave the European Union. She knows it's bonkers. She can't stand up and say so.
They don't. 48% don't want to leave the European Union.
Saboteurs, crush them. We're all Brexiters now. Yeah. Aren't you listening to Ian Duncan Smith?
She needed to stand up, and someone's going to have to do it soon because this country is going down the pan if we don't.
Nonsense. It's not as if the fishing industry have asked for an exemption. What are you making this stuff up? Where are you getting this information from?
But, James, you cannot feel sorry for her. You really cannot.
All right. So it is.
Herself.
You're a woman, I'm presuming.
Yeah.
So. This is low-level chauvinism. This is my mum's fault. I'm going to blame my mum. My mum raised me to treat women differently from men, and when I see a woman suffering in a very public and unpleasant fashion, I feel sorry for her, in a way that perhaps if it was a man, I'd be cheering.
Well, do you know what? Perhaps you should see a therapist, James. I really don't know. I don't know what to tell you. No. She has not any... She deserves no sympathy.
People don't understand politics, he says. An outbreak of inconceivable conceit. Incorrigible FCA, one of my most dedicated followers and contributors, absolutely furious with me today. I'm not even furious. I think he's just utterly befuddled. You feel sorry for Theresa May because she can't tell the truth, he writes. Yes! It's a bit like, would you tell the children the truth if you couldn't feed them next week? You wouldn't. You'd tell them there's going to be lots of food because you don't want them to spend a week being frightened of being starving and then being starving. You tell them there's plenty of food coming next week in the hope that something turns up, and you don't tell them the truth because the truth is too painful for them to swallow. Also, they'll deny it. There'll be some bloke... front page of the Daily Mail saying, actually, there's loads and loads of food, and the only reason you can't get hold of it is because of immigrants. It's 10:47. I can see in the abstract, writes Ed in Stockport, that May's position is tragic, but this is the concrete. She's surrendered to it, even though she knows it's wrong, even though she knows her own red lines will cripple the country. Not a gram of sympathy. Well, I'm generally not genuinely not doing this for provocative reasons. I very honestly admitted to you at the outset I feel really sorry for Theresa May, so honestly in fact that I'm prepared to admit it may be a sort of benign chauvinism. Yogesh has pointed out that by blaming my mum for the fact that I treat women differently from men, I'm blaming a woman for my own sexism. It's probably quite a good point. But when you say she's surrendered to it even though she knows it's wrong, I think she thinks it is wrong, but that if anybody else was in charge, and look at what the choices were, if anybody else had been in charge, it would be even worse. And this Brexit Britain is essentially a choice between a hare sandwich and a sort of ice cream full of snails. I mean, it's not a choice between good and bad. It's a choice between different flavours of bad. 50 Shades of Shabby is going to be the Brexit Britain choice spectrum. But she can't tell people that because of the man whose party she attended last night. You know, the Prime Minister went to a newspaper editor's party last night, having accepted the resignation of a woman she would have sacked if she had any power at all. The Foreign Secretary in her government is a witness for the prosecution of an innocent British citizen in Iran. And yet, you know, if I told you to get cross today about train drivers having the audacity to earn 1/50th of what their chief executive earns, or, I don't know, Topshop having some changing rooms where boys and girls and anybody in between can all try on new jeans, you really are going to get cross about that. And not about the fact that an innocent British woman is seeing her prison sentence extended in a hostile country, large parts of which are in solitary confinement, because our Foreign Secretary is a self-serving idiot. You got a sociopathic editor of the Daily Mail essentially holding the Prime Minister hostage. That's why I feel sorry for her. I don't see how she can escape. Look what they do to the judges. So, an independent judiciary. What is Paul Dacre proud of? If you ever get the chance, I didn't get an invitation last night, oddly. If you ever get the chance, would you ask him from me what he's actually proud of about Britain? Because he's not proud of having an independent judiciary, one of the key deliveries of Magna Carta, one of the most fundamental foundation stones of our unwritten constitution. In fact, one of the most key guarantors of our freedoms. An independent judiciary is a thing envied throughout the world in oppressed countries, but Paul Dacre hates it, because when the independent judiciary delivered a judgment that he didn't like, he called them enemies of the people. So he doesn't like an independent judiciary. He doesn't think judges should be free to operate independently and intelligently. He thinks they should exist simply to rubber stamp government policies that he likes. So if you see him, ask him what he's proud of. He's not proud of an independent judiciary. He's not proud of academic freedom. He's not proud of the fact that we live in a country where our universities are full of some of the brightest people on the planet who exercise their expertise and their intelligence and arrive at conclusions about the subjects that they've spent their entire life studying. He doesn't think they should be free to do that. He thinks they should keep their conclusions to themselves if he doesn't like them. He thinks that universities should have their curriculums policed by government, in some sense, as long as it's a government whose policing he approves of. So he's not proud of having an independent judiciary, one of the things that I think is most beautiful about Britain. He's not proud of academic freedom and our university institutions, which are demonstrably one of the most brilliant things about Britain and one of the first things that's going to suffer after Brexit. Is he proud of freedom of speech? I don't know. He published a piece recently in his newspaper suggesting that I should go back to measuring inside legs at Aquascutum, the menswear emporium where I began my career. So he certainly doesn't think people like me should have freedom of speech, which means perhaps that a significant number of people listening to this programme shouldn't have freedom of speech either. Certainly doesn't think that MPs should have freedom of speech, because when they exercise it, he runs front pages saying, crush the saboteurs. So he doesn't like an independent judiciary, he doesn't like academic freedom, he doesn't like freedom of speech, and he doesn't like parliamentary democracy either, because if we were to ask Parliament what they think about the absolute nonsense and disaster that we're heading towards as a country, he'd tell you that they shouldn't be allowed to vote at all, and it is the will of the people to slit their own throats. So he doesn't like an independent judiciary, he doesn't like parliamentary democracy, he doesn't believe in parliamentary sovereignty because he believes it should be trumped by an advisory plebiscite, he doesn't like freedom of speech, and he doesn't like academic freedom. What is he proud of? Is he proud of ordinary British working people? Not really, no, because he gets furious when people like train drivers secure pay rises that bring their wages up to approximately 1/50th of the chief executive of a company with profits of £100 million. So what does the right-wing media tell you about train drivers today? Get cross with the train drivers for securing a pay rise from a company that makes a profit of £100 million. Because any penny making its way into the pocket of a train driver could have been making its way into the pocket of shareholders and investors who deserve to earn more for sitting on their backsides all day counting their capital than the men and women who actually drive the train. So he's not proud of ordinary British working people. He's not proud of parliamentary democracy. He's not proud of parliamentary sovereignty. He's not proud of freedom of speech. He's not proud of academic freedom. And he's not proud of an independent judiciary. If you ever meet Paul Dacre, would you ask him from me what the hell he is proud of in this country? Apart from his own legacy of hatred, bile and bigotry, best exemplified by the fact that he put the assassination of an elected representative by a white supremacist terrorist, obsessed like him with immigration, on page 28 or 29 of his newspaper. Well, I believe on that day there was a story on page 5 or 7 about the length of baguettes. If you see him, ask him. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need if you want to tell me whether or not it is nuts to feel sorry for Theresa May. And I've gone off on one again, so I'm going to have to take advice during the break on whether or not we carry on with this or whether or not we park it and go somewhere else. Paul's in East Dulwich. Paul, this could be the last word or it could be the beginning of the second chapter. What would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Paul.
You know, I'm hearing what you're saying about Theresa May, and there's a part of me that thinks, oh, ouch, that one hurts. Oh, look at the expression on her face. She's going through it.
Yeah.
But then I have to remind myself, back in January when she was made leader of that Tory conference, and some of those words still ring with me, when she spoke about, it was almost arrogantly talking about, it will be a red, white and blue Brexit. Yeah. And, you know, citizens of nowhere. You had a woman. This was the true spirit of Theresa May, speaking out of what she believed and what she wanted. And I thought, my God, this woman is absolutely frightening. Absolutely frightening. And then, to the point where if you took that election where she wanted to have even more power, so that, in a way, I think that she went for that, calling that election simply to have even more power to push through all these Brexit policies without having to take the, the route through Parliament.
This is where it all falls apart for me, because I see it so much as her being held hostage by the sort of axis of Murdoch and Dacre, that everything you've said I can excuse on the grounds that she had to do that to avoid getting a kicking from them. And maybe that makes her a coward, or maybe it makes her a pragmatist. I'm not sure which, but if I lean towards pragmatist, I can still feel sorry for her.
Well, I can't. I really can't.
No?
Because she called an election to gain more power.
So it's the things that she hasn't had to do that should undermine my cautious sympathy. She could have safeguarded the rights of the 3.2 million EU people living here, and she has chosen not to. As anybody who makes even a cursory examination of the facts will conclude. But of course she also knows that a significant population of the country won't make a cursory examination of the facts, and they'll swallow the lies that they swallowed when deciding how to vote, and they'll say, oh, it's the EU's fault we haven't safeguarded this. She could have done that and she hasn't. So park your sympathy, James.
Well, in a way, you're sort of going against your own argument of wanting to sympathise with her, simply because she could have called it, she didn't. Why? Because she's playing to the, if you want to call it a majority of, I still call it half and half in this country.
And the furiously unthinking half are the ones that she needs to keep on side, because they're kind of, their king, if you will, wields such unaccountable and utterly unjustified power. OK, Paul, thank you. I'm late for the news. Take that as a compliment. There's 3 or 4 phone lines free into the studio, but I want to gauge from your reaction now whether or not you want to carry on talking about this. So if the phones ring off the hook, we'll carry on. If they don't, we'll move on to a question about climbing frames, cotton wool parenting and mollycoddling, a subject that I actually love talking about. So don't look on that as a I mean, it's a 50-50 at the moment. It's up to you what happens next. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you've got something interesting to say about Theresa May's almost unprecedented plight. It's 11:02. Why didn't she sack her? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that as well. We should get Theo. We haven't heard from Theo for a few days. He got a tweet the other day asking if we'd fallen out. Poor Petal. Theo Ashwood, LBC's political editor. Why didn't she sack Priti Patel? I'd have sacked her. I'd have sacked her while she was still in the air. That would be like the opposite of that John Ronson case study. You remember the woman who tweeted something inappropriate about slavery while she was in the air? It was a PR on her way to Africa, and the tweet went nuts while she was in the air, and then she landed and found that her whole life had fallen to pieces. An astonishing chapter about that in John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. Kind of the opposite happened to Priti Patel, didn't it? Everyone else was following her flight, and she was on it knowing what was waiting for her. But how come she was allowed to write a resignation letter? Also with that ludicrous but profoundly significant final paragraph about how I will continue to fight for a free and sovereign Britain, still perpetrating the myth that we have spent the last 40 years being somehow not free. What is it you wanted to do, Priti, that you weren't allowed? Oh, yeah, of course, meet with foreign governments without telling the Prime Minister. Oh, no, well, you could do that. You just got caught. So you want to be free to do that kind of stuff without getting caught. Is that what you mean? What do you mean by free and sovereign, you strange woman? Just unbelievable. But Theresa May can't even sack her. Let alone Boris Johnson, who is now a witness for the prosecution in the bogus imprisonment of an innocent British woman in an Iranian jail. Who would you like to cite, first of all, oppressive Islamist dictatorship? Who would you like to cite, first of all, as a witness for your continuing incarceration of this woman? Well, I'd like to cite, I call the British Foreign Secretary, Mr. Boris Johnson. Well, she was teaching people journalism, but her entire legal case was built upon the proof and knowledge that she wasn't Foreign Secretary. Her own boss has provided incontrovertible evidence that she was doing nothing of the sort. Her own legal team, if they'd been allowed to represent her in court, would have explained that she was on holiday visiting her parents with their granddaughter. No, Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. He said that she was teaching journalists, which means that she was indulging in propaganda, which means that we can lock her up in solitary confinement for as long as we want. We'll probably waterboard her a bit as well, because Boris Johnson's just said that she was doing the things we've accused her of, and he's the Foreign Secretary of her own country, using the word inadvertent as well on Islamic, on Iranian, forgive me, state TV yesterday. It's funny, isn't it? Because all the people who cheer for Boris, they're supposed to hate Muslims, and yet when we've got a British girl locked up in an Iranian jail, as a direct result, that sentence could now be extended as a direct result of his idiocy and incompetence. Oddly enough, turns out that they don't hate Muslims that much. It's absolutely fine to leave a British girl locked up in a hellhole of a jail, because to call for her to be released would involve criticising Boris Johnson. Well done, everybody. And 9 minutes after 11 is the time. Mystery Hour on the way at 12, in case you're worried about the absence of levity from the programme this morning. Mike is in Marlow. Do you feel sorry for Theresa May, Mike?
Yes, I do.
Good man.
Yeah, I really do, because she didn't bring this on. It was Cameron. She's got to deal with it and try and run the country. And you've got...
Well, she can run the country when she's not going to Paul Dacre's parties, but the rest of the time she's running the country, yeah.
I mean, yeah. We'll forgive her that one. But then you've got, you've got the clown Johnson jumping around behind her like a blooming idiot, and then you've got Priti Patel running off and doing her own thing.
Thinking that they'll get away with it. Thinking that they'll get away with it, and in one case probably being right. The only reason Boris Johnson hasn't uttered a full and frank and complete apology is because he knows he doesn't have to. He's literally using the continuing imprisonment of a British civilian to flex his muscles in front of Theresa May. It's disgusting.
Well, there you go. There you go. He's a clown. The man's a clown. But all he's waiting for is for her to jump ship or for them to get fed up with her, and then he can jump in a nice warm seat.
Which enhances the sympathy we feel for her, because she knows that he would be even worse than what is happening now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And would you want that clown in charge?
Well, no, I wouldn't. I presume that was a rhetorical question, but I thought I'd answer it anyway out of politeness.
Sorry, yeah.
But there are plenty of people... Do you know when things go nuts, though? Is it you say, would you want that clown in charge? Some people will say, no, I want that even bigger clown, Jacob Rees-Mogg. And that's the will of the people, Mike, and anyone who doesn't like it is a saboteur who must be crushed. It's 10 minutes after 11. I like Mike's laugh. Mike, give me another bit of your laugh. You've got a lovely laugh. Oh, he's gone. Parisa is in Ealing. Parisa, what would you like to say?
So can I just start by thanking you first, James, when the media is so right-wing, you're a breath of fresh air.
It's so right-wing, I sometimes look left-wing, despite being a slavish centrist. It's quite bonkers. But anyway, yes, you're welcome. I'll carry on for as long as they let me.
So for me, I think my turning point was yesterday, really. Up until that point, I've kind of resisted feeling sorry for her because I thought that somehow that would mean I'm sympathising with the Conservatives whose values I don't buy into at all. But I think yesterday with Priti Patel, either way, I think Theresa May was a loser, and I think if she'd have kept her, she would have looked weak and lame duck and completely dependent. And with Priti Patel gone, she's lost one of the probably last prominent Conservative MPs that she has. She hasn't got a very big group at the moment. So yeah,
So you stopped feeling sorry for her yesterday?
No, I started.
Oh, you start? Yes.
I allowed myself to feel sorry for her.
No, and because I think she is a hostage to fortune. Now, you might say, as many are, that she marched voluntarily and willingly into this situation, but I don't think that's relevant. She's in it, and the question I'm asking is, do you feel sorry for this politician in this position at this time? And like you, I do, although I probably came to it a little quicker than you did. What would you have done with Priti Patel if you'd been in charge, Theresa?
I think I would have sacked her.
Yeah.
I think it was a sackable offence, and I think I would have sacked her. But either way, whatever Theresa May would have done yesterday, I think she was probably, that to me was a turning point. I think either way, she's lost. As much as I dislike Priti Patel, she's probably one of the last in a very small group of Conservative MPs who are quite well known and prominent.
Well, it's one way of looking at it, I suppose. So it depends what you're well known and prominent for, in my view. But I suppose that luxury is not one that Theresa May can afford at the moment. She seems to me to be a pretty hideous woman, Priti Patel, to be honest with you. Probably one of the most profoundly non-nominative determinism cases in history. This little horrible line at the bottom about freedom and sovereignty, that's one notch away from blood and soil in the vocabulary of far-right politics. And it's utterly just as meaningless. But I like you. You're nicer than I am, Theresa, if you can extend that to her. Tim's in Colchester. Tim, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Tim.
I actually agree with you that I do feel a little bit sorry for Theresa May, and like yourself, have done for a little while now. I felt sorry for John Major too, because he was in quite a difficult position. And I think
Kelvin Mackenzie was the Paul Dacre of his era. He used to boast about bullying John Major, didn't he, and ringing him up. And
yes.
Kelvin Mackenzie's another one who's called for me to be sacked, but he's now, of course, unemployed. Hopefully Paul Dacre will reach a similar fate soon.
Yes, I wouldn't hold your breath, unfortunately, James. I think you might be waiting a little while, and he will still have his millions from his EU subsidised.
Retired to spend more time with his shooting estate in Scotland, while telling the rest of us how metropolitan elites are out of touch with ordinary people.
Yes, absolutely. But like I say, I think there are sort of considerable parallels with John Major. A very small majority. I mean, she started off with a small majority, and obviously it's got even smaller in that it's now non-existent. And people sniping at her from the side, while not willing to actually take responsibility for anything that's big and important. So I think there, as I say, there are quite significant parallels. It was quite obvious when John Major referred to, if you don't mind me using.
No, don't use it, because there might be children listening. Say baskets.
Yes, bar stewards.
Yes, the bar stewards. Nicely done.
Yeah. So,
and he was talking about precisely the kind of people who Theresa May is terrified of now. He's talking about these utterly evidence-free ideologues like Redwood and Ian Duncan Smith, and to a degree, I suppose, Priti Patel. Michael Gove is always the exception to this, although I've got a bit of an Achilles heel for him as well, which might be misplaced. But Michael Gove does seem brighter.
I don't care that, I'm afraid.
No?
As soon as he said the words, I think
experts
had enough of experts.
No, he denies that he claims that it's been taken out of context. Being taken out of context is the new, you would say that, wouldn't you? I couldn't possibly comment, isn't it? It was taken out of context.
It is. Priti Patel herself is a, if I might use the word advisedly, interesting character.
Yes.
She's an MP for a constituency quite close to me, and she's, although she sort of gives the impression of being quite modern and forward and that sort of thing, she's a proper old school hang 'em and flog 'em Tory.
Who also contended 3 years ago that the British Work Cup, when they begin in employment are among the idlest on the planet. It's one of my favourite little sound bites from this great champion of ordinary working people.
Yeah, there's also a piece that it does the rounds on YouTube quite a lot, a clip from BBC Question Time, where she appears on a panel with Ian Hislop, and they're discussing the death penalty. And Ian Hislop points out, despite, whatever other objections people have to the death penalty, the actual practical matter is that there are a number of people who are alive now who would have been wrongly executed.
Yes.
In the past, and David Frost, when we're talking about Dimbleby, turns to Priti Patel and says, "Well, that's quite a logical argument, Priti Patel." And she says, "No, we must have the death penalty. It is a deterrent." And Ian Hislop says, "Well, these people would have been wrongly executed." "Oh no, they wouldn't." Right. And he said, "But they would be dead if we had the death penalty." And it's just like the light of intelligence just isn't there. She's such a hang 'em and flog 'em sort of old stock Tory.
I'm fascinated by people like this, and I will loosely conflate them with the basest rump of the Brexit vote. I tie myself in not saying not everybody who voted to leave the European is an ignorant racist by any stretch of the imagination, but I waste my breath every time because all the ignorant racists insist that I keep saying all of the Leave voters are ignorant racists. I'm not. I'm just you lot, the ignorant racists. The other lot aren't. But I'm fascinated by this kind of, you assemble a fairly simplistic worldview in your late teens, and you stick with it for the rest of your life. And that seems to me to sum up the rump of right-wing thinking in this country, in my profession, in politics and in the public at large. So you come up with the idea that you support the death penalty. You're prevented with incontrovertible evidence that it will inevitably lead to innocent people losing their lives. You are yourself an innocent person. So the opposition to your position on the death penalty is that someone like you could end up dying unjustly. And your response is, "I still support the death penalty." It's an amazing mindset, isn't it?
Yes, it is actually amazing. I'm always sort of swayed by the case of Timothy Evans, who was...
of course, let him have it.
No, that's a different one. Timothy Evans was the innocent party in the Christie case.
The husband of one of Christie's victims who was hanged for the murders that Christie committed.
Yeah, and Christie was the prime witness for the prosecution.
And on that bombshell, it's 11:17.